The force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy and destiny. For thousands of generations, this truth has held absolute, until the moment something arrived that existed entirely outside its reach. No prophecy foretold it. No Jedi sensed its approach. No Sith Lord anticipated the disruption. And yet, in the skies above Lothal, reality itself tore open. Rimuru Tempest felt the dimensional boundary collapse around him like shattering glass. One moment, he and his inner circle had been investigating an anomaly in the cardinal world, some kind of ancient weapon signature that Ramiris couldn't identify. The next, space-time fractured, and they were falling through a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and screaming physics. His ultimate skill, Void God Azathoth, immediately began analyzing the phenomenon, but even his god-tier processing couldn't stabilize the rift before it spat them out into an entirely different universe. They materialized 300 meters above golden grasslands, the sudden transition from dimensional chaos to normal space leaving even Rimuru momentarily disoriented. Veldora Tempest, the storm dragon, had instinctively manifested his full draconic form during the transit, massive azure scales gleaming in the light of an unfamiliar sun as his wings spread wide to arrest his fall. Ranga appeared beneath Rimuru in his Tempest Star Wolf form, darkness rippling around his silver fur as he landed with predatory grace. Benimura touched down in a crouch, black flames already flickering around his hands as he scanned for threats. Shuna floated gently to the earth, her analytical magic already weaving through the air around them. Diablo materialized from shadow itself, his expression one of fascinated amusement. Geld, Gobta, and so I landed in formation, immediately establishing a defensive perimeter. Report, Rimuru said calmly, though his mind was racing. His thought acceleration was already processing millions of data points per second, and what he was discovering troubled him deeply. Master Rimuru, Shuna spoke first, her voice carrying an edge of concern. The fundamental laws of this dimension are different. I'm detecting an omnipresent energy field that permeates everything, living beings, the planet, even the space between atoms. It's interfering with our magicule manipulation, though not critically. Diablo's smile widened dangerously. How fascinating. This energy field appears to have its own will, its own structure. It's attempting to categorize us, to understand us, and failing quite spectacularly. He paused, tilting his head. I estimate our efficiency is currently at approximately 75%. Nothing that concerns me, of course. Veldora shifted back into his humanoid form, a tall figure with wild blue hair and golden eyes that sparkled with childlike curiosity despite his catastrophic power. Kohaha. This place feels weird, Rimuru. That energy thing keeps poking at my aura like it's trying to figure out what I am. He grinned widely. Should I show them what a true dragon looks like? Please don't destroy anything yet, Rimuru replied, allowing himself a slight smile despite the situation. Let's figure out where we are first. So I materialized from shadow beside them, his expression grave. Master Rimuru, I've detected a settlement approximately 8 kilometers northwest. Technology level appears advanced, I'm seeing aerial vehicles and energy weapons. But there's something else. His eyes narrowed. Military occupation. The settlement is under surveillance by armed forces that appear to be enforcing some kind of authoritarian control. Before Rimuru could respond, his universal perception picked up incoming threats. 3 aircraft were approaching at high speed from the direction of the settlement, sleek, angular craft painted in stark white and gray. With weapons ports already glowing with charge buildup. Well, Benimura said, his hand drifting to his katana's hilt, seems like we're about to meet the locals. The lead craft, what Rimuru's analytical skills identified as a TIE fighter, based on rapid data synthesis, opened fire without warning or hail. Twin streams of green energy bolts streaked toward their position, each shot carrying enough destructive force to vaporize an unprotected human. Rimuru didn't even move. His multi-layer barrier activated automatically, and the blaster bolts simply ceased to exist the moment they touched the outermost defensive layer, not deflected or absorbed, but negated at the conceptual level. The TIE fighters screamed overhead, banking hard for another pass. "Hostile contact confirmed," Rimuru said with a sigh. "Diablo, disable their weapons systems but don't destroy the craft. I want to understand what we're dealing with before we escalate." "As you wish, my lord." Diablo's voice dripped with barely restrained eagerness. He raised one hand, and space-time rippled around the 3 TIE fighters. The pilots inside would have experienced a moment of pure confusion as their weapon systems simultaneously imploded, not through mechanical failure, but through localized gravity manipulation that crushed the delicate firing mechanisms into useless scrap. The fighters themselves remained intact, but they were now as harmless as birds. The lead pilot's voice crackled across an open comm channel, audible to Rimuru's enhanced hearing even at this distance. "Command, this is Delta Squadron. We've engaged unknown hostiles and lost all weapons. Repeat, complete weapons failure. These things just, what the hell are they?" Another voice responded, cold and mechanical, "Delta Squadron, withdraw immediately. We're scrambling reinforcements. Star Destroyer Lawbringer is deploying ground forces. Do not let those entities reach the civilian sectors." Rimuru's expression hardened. The terminology was unfamiliar, but the tone was universal: occupying military force, fear of unknown variables, and most concerning, the casual reference to civilian sectors, as if the population existed to be controlled rather than protected. "Shuna," he said quietly, "what are you picking up from the settlement?" The Oni princess's eyes glowed with analytical magic as she extended her perception across the kilometers. When she spoke, her voice was tight with controlled anger. "Oppression. Fear. The military presence isn't protecting these people, they're occupying them. I'm detecting labor camps, forced conscription, and what appears to be systematic cultural suppression. This isn't a defense force, Master Rimuru. This is an empire." Veldora cracked his knuckles, his playful demeanor evaporating. "So we've landed in another world with tyrants who need their faces punched in. Some things are universal, I guess." Gobta, perched on Ranga's back, somehow managed to look both terrified and eager. "Are we gonna fight a whole empire? Because that sounds really dangerous and also really cool." Rimuru felt the weight of leadership settle over him once again. They were in an unknown universe, their powers were slightly disrupted by this omnipresent, forced energy, and they'd immediately been attacked by what appeared to be an authoritarian military force oppressing civilians. Every instinct honed through years of building the Tempest Federation told him that intervention might be necessary, but they didn't understand this world's politics, history, or conflicts yet. "We gather intelligence first," he decided. "So I want you to infiltrate that settlement and learn everything you can, government structure, this empire everyone's mentioning, why they're occupying this planet, and if there's any resistance movement. Diablo, you're with him. Maintain stealth and avoid casualties if possible." "Understood," so I said, already fading into shadow. Diablo bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "As my lord commands. Though I must say, I'm quite looking forward to learning more about this universe's power structures. They seem delightfully fragile." As the two vanished, Rimuru turned to address the rest of his inner circle. In the distance, he could see more aircraft launching from what his analysis identified as a military base, dozens of them, along with larger transport ships likely carrying ground forces. This was about to become a much larger incident. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "We don't know the full situation here. For all we know, there's a perfectly good reason for military occupation. Maybe this planet was conquered by hostile forces and these soldiers are peacekeepers. Or maybe they're tyrants crushing innocent people beneath their boots. Until we know which, we defend ourselves but we don't initiate lethal force. Understood?" "Understood," came the unified response, though Veldora looked slightly disappointed at not getting to immediately unleash his true dragon powers. Rimuru stepped forward, flames dancing along his blade. And when we do understand the situation, Rimuru-sama. Rimuru's eyes, usually warm and friendly, took on an edge that his inner circle recognized well. It was the look he wore when someone had crossed the line, when mercy had been exhausted and judgment was inevitable. Then we'll do what we always do, Rimuru. We'll protect those who can't protect themselves, and we'll teach bullies that there are consequences for their actions. The approaching Imperial forces had no idea what they were flying toward. They saw unknown entities, potential threats to be neutralized with overwhelming firepower. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that they were about to encounter beings who had survived a war against literal demon lords and primordial entities. Beings who had rebuilt civilization from nothing, who had forged a nation where monsters and humans lived as equals, who had stared down apocalyptic threats and emerged victorious. The Empire was about to learn that the Force wasn't the only power in the universe. And some powers didn't bow to tyranny. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Imperial garrison on Lothal had weathered rebel attacks, pirate raids, and even the occasional wildlife incident. What it had never experienced was complete tactical confusion. In the command center of Base Delta 7, Commander Brom Titus stared at the holographic display with growing frustration as his subordinates scrambled to make sense of contradictory data. "Say that again, Lieutenant," Titus demanded, his voice sharp. The sensor technician's hands trembled slightly. "Sir, the targets are still standing in the exact same position. They haven't moved. 47 TIE fighters, 12 AT-ST walkers, and 3 full platoons of stormtroopers are converging on their location, and they're just standing there." "Standing there," Titus repeated slowly. "After disabling 3 of our fighters without firing a shot." "Yes, sir." Delta Squadron reported complete weapons system failure with no visible cause. "Engineering says it's physically impossible, the firing mechanisms were crushed from the inside, but there's no evidence of projectile impact or energy discharge." The lieutenant pulled up a secondary display. "And sir, our scans still can't identify what they are. Biological? Synthetic? The readings keep changing. It's like they're made of something that doesn't exist in our database." Titus leaned over the console, studying the grainy visual feed from a high-altitude reconnaissance drone. 9 figures stood in loose formation on the grassland, various sizes and shapes. Some humanoid, others distinctly not. One appeared to be a massive wolf-like creature. Another seemed to shift between forms as if the camera couldn't decide what it was looking at. "Have they made any attempts to communicate?" Titus asked. "Negative, sir. They appear to be waiting." Waiting. That bothered Titus more than aggression would have. Enemies who attacked could be understood, predicted, destroyed. Enemies who stood calmly in the face of overwhelming Imperial firepower while disabling advanced military craft with invisible weapons. Those were the kind of enemies that ended careers, or lives. "Sir." Another technician called out urgently. 2 of the targets just vanished from sensors. "What do you mean, vanished?" "They were there, and then they weren't. No hyperspace signature, no cloaking field distortion, no." The technician went pale. "Sir, internal security just reported unauthorized presences in Sector 7. 2 intruders materialized inside the base perimeter." Titus felt ice slide down his spine. Sector 7 was 3 kilometers from the grassland position. Nothing moved that fast, and nothing bypassed their security that easily. He slammed his fist on the comm panel. "Lock down Sector 7. Deploy security teams in." The holographic display flickered. Every screen in the command center went dark for exactly 3 seconds. When they returned, a new message scrolled across every monitor in High Galactic. "We come in peace. We wish to understand your presence here. Cease hostilities and open communication channels. Continued aggression will be interpreted as intent to harm civilians. Titus stared at the message, his military instincts warring with the cold political calculation that had earned him his rank. These beings, whatever they were, had just demonstrated the ability to infiltrate his base and take control of his systems without triggering a single alarm. They could have deleted critical data, opened the reactor shielding, or vented atmosphere from occupied sections. Instead, they'd left a message asking for dialogue. "Communications," he said quietly. "Open a channel to the target's position. Wideband, all frequencies." A moment later, the comm crackled to life. "This is Commander Brahm Titus of the Galactic Empire, acting authority on Lothal. You have entered restricted Imperial space and disabled military assets. Identify yourselves immediately." The response came in a voice that was somehow both young and impossibly ancient, casual and terrifyingly powerful. "This is Rimuru Tempest, leader of the Tempest Federation. We arrived in your territory through circumstances beyond our control, a dimensional accident, if you want the technical explanation. We have no hostile intent toward your people, but we were fired upon without provocation or communication attempt. That's generally considered rude where we come from. Dimensional accident." Titus had no idea what that meant, but the casual tone irritated him more than the content. "You are in violation of Imperial law. Surrender yourselves for processing and interrogation, or face immediate termination." There was a pause. "Then, let me make sure I understand correctly. We appear in your airspace by accident, you attack us immediately, we defend ourselves without harming anyone, and your response is to demand our surrender for interrogation." The voice remained pleasant, but something in its undertone made Titus's survival instincts scream. "Commander Titus, I've been analyzing your military communications. Your forces aren't here to protect Lothal. You're occupying it. Labor camps. Forced conscription. Summary executions for sedition. So before we discuss surrender, I think we need to talk about why an empire thinks it has the right to enslave entire populations." Titus's jaw tightened. "You know nothing about maintaining order in a lawless galaxy. The Empire brought peace after the chaos of the Clone Wars. We provide security, infrastructure, and purpose to primitive worlds that would tear themselves apart without strong leadership." Strong leadership. The voice sounded almost sad now. "Is that what you call it when children are taken from their families to work in factories? When farmers are executed for failing to meet quotas? I've built a nation from nothing, Commander. I know the difference between leadership and tyranny." On the tactical display, the Imperial force was now in position, a complete encirclement with overwhelming firepower. Titus made his decision. These beings were dangerous, unpredictable, and far too interested in Imperial governance. They would be eliminated, and the incident would be classified. No reports to higher command necessary. "Final warning," Titus said coldly. "Surrender or be destroyed." "That's disappointing," Rimuru replied. "I was hoping we could resolve this peacefully." Titus cut the channel and turned to his weapons officer. "All units, open fire. Sustained bombardment. I want nothing left but scorched. Every weapon in the Imperial formation, every blaster, every Walker cannon, every missile launcher, simultaneously deactivated. Not through mechanical failure. Through something far stranger. The metal of the weapon housing simply unmade itself, molecular bonds dissolving into inert powder that fell harmlessly to the ground. Within seconds, 300 fully armed Imperial soldiers found themselves holding useless stocks and barrels. The command center erupted in chaos. Status reports flooded in from every unit, all identical, complete weapons failure through impossible means. "Sir." The sensor technician's voice cracked. "One of the targets is moving, the large one. Thermal readings are spiking off the scale." The holographic display showed the massive blue-scaled entity shifting forms, growing larger with each passing second. What had been humanoid was now definitively draconic, wings that blotted out the sun, scales that gleamed with contained devastation, eyes that held the accumulated fury of something ancient and unstoppable. Rimuru Tempest rose into the sky above the disarmed Imperial forces, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire base with the authority of a true dragon. Kohaha. Listen well, little armored humans. My brother Rimuru tried to be nice, tried to talk things through peacefully. But you shot first, threatened second, and showed exactly zero interest in anything except violence and domination. Storm clouds gathered above him, responding to his rage. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stand down, you're going to explain yourselves, and you're going to stop pointing weapons at beings who could erase your entire military base without breaking a sweat. Or. Thunder crashed across clear skies. We demonstrate exactly why attacking a true dragon is the last mistake civilizations usually make. In the command center, Titus felt something he hadn't experienced since his early days as a junior officer, genuine, primal fear. Not fear of death in combat, but fear of insignificance, of facing something so far beyond imperial power that resistance itself became meaningless. His calm officer's hands shook as she reported, "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from Capital City. It's Governor Price. She's demanding an immediate status report and," the officer went even paler. "Sir, she's also receiving reports of rebel activity in the Western Industrial Sector. They're saying this is a coordinated attack." Rebels. Of course. These dimensional invaders had provided the perfect distraction for insurgent operations. Titus had two crises now, and resources to handle neither properly. On the grassland, Rimuru Tempest sighed deeply, and Veldora descended back to humanoid form, looking pleased with himself. "Diablo," Rimuru said quietly into the darkness. "I think the commander needs some motivation to talk honestly. Can you arrange a private conversation?" From the shadows of the command center itself, a voice answered, smooth as silk and sharp as broken glass. "Already done, my lord. The commander and I are about to have a very enlightening discussion." Titus spun around to find a figure in elegant black clothing standing directly behind him, having appeared in the most secured room on the base without triggering a single alarm. The figure smiled, and his eyes held something that made even a hardened Imperial officer want to flee. "Hello, Commander," Diablo said pleasantly. "Let's talk about governance, shall we? I have so many questions about your Empire's methods. And you're going to answer every single one." The rebel cell operating on Lothal had exactly 17 members, 4 functioning blasters, and 1 barely operational freighter. They called themselves Phoenix Cell, though Cell was generous for what amounted to a desperate handful of idealists fighting an empire with infinite resources. Their leader, a Twi'lek woman named Hera Syndulla, had seen enough imperial atrocities to fuel a lifetime of resistance, but she'd also seen enough failed operations to know when something was too good to be true. And the current situation was definitely too good to be true. "Explain it to me again," Hera said, studying the tactical display in their hidden base, a repurposed communications tower in Lothal's wilderness. The entire Imperial garrison just lost all weapons capability simultaneously. Every single one. Canon Jarrus, the cell's Jedi advisor and Hera's partner in more ways than one, ran a hand through his hair. His connection to the Force had been screaming warnings for the past hour, a discordant sensation like reality itself was off-key. "That's what our sources are reporting. Complete weapons failure across the board. Molecular dissolution of firing mechanisms. Nothing in the Imperial arsenal or Separatist archives matches that technology. And the cause?" Hera pressed. "Unknown entities. 9 of them. They appeared out of nowhere, literally, according to sensor logs, and have been standing in one location ever since. The Empire engaged first, and," Canon paused, his expression troubled. "Hera, I can't sense them through the Force. At all. It's like they don't exist in the same reality we do." Sabine Wren, their Mandalorian explosives expert and artist, looked up from her datapad. Her armor was painted in vibrant purple and orange, a deliberate contrast to Imperial gray. I've been monitoring Imperial encrypted channels. They're terrified. Commander Titus sounds like he's having a breakdown. He keeps referencing dimensional entities and non-force combat capabilities. She grinned fiercely. Whatever these things are, they've got the Empire completely scrambled. Zeb Aurelios, their Lazet muscle and resident cynic, crossed his massive arms. So we've got 9 mysterious beings who can disable Imperial weapons with a thought, don't register on force senses, and haven't declared their intentions. Could be worse, could be another Inquisitor showing up. Or it could be something worse than Inquisitors, Canon countered. His hand instinctively touched the lightsaber hidden beneath his jacket. We don't know who they are, what they want, or if they're even interested in our conflict. For all we know, they're another conquering force that just happens to be more powerful than the Empire. Hera's calm crackled. Phoenix Leader, this is Chopper. You need to see this. Now. The cranky astromech droid had been monitoring Imperial communications from a relay station. When Hera pulled up his feed, she understood his urgency. A massive holographic projection displayed the image of one of the entities, specifically, the enormous blue dragon that had manifested above the Imperial formation. The recording captured Veldora's declaration in full, and even through compressed data, the sheer power radiating from the creature was unmistakable. A dragon, Zeb said flatly. We're dealing with an actual dragon. Not just a dragon, Canon murmured, his force senses struggling to process what he was witnessing. Something beyond natural. I've heard legends from the old Jedi archives about creatures from other dimensions, beings that existed outside the Force's influence. But those were myths, cautionary tales about the dangers of dark side rituals gone wrong. Sabine was already pulling up additional data. I'm cross-referencing historical records. Nothing in known space matches these entities. But their leader, this Rimuru Tempest, he didn't attack. He tried to negotiate. Called out the Empire for occupation, labor camps, executions. He knew exactly what was happening here. That detail caught Hera's attention. He knew. Which means he either has incredible intelligence-gathering capabilities, or, she trailed off, considering implications. Or his people value truth and justice, Canon finished quietly. Which would make them potential allies. Or enemies who happen to dislike the Empire slightly more than they'll dislike us, Zeb countered. Remember, the enemy of my enemy is sometimes just another enemy waiting their turn. Hera made her decision with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned that hesitation cost lives. We make contact. Carefully. Canon, Sabine, you're with me. Zeb, stay here with Chopper and monitor Imperial movements. If this goes wrong, you evacuate the civilians we've been protecting and get them off-world. And if it goes right? Zeb asked. Then maybe, for once, we're not the most outgunned people in the sector. Rimuru felt the approach of 3 individuals long before they came into visual range. His universal perception tracked their movements through the grassland, 2 humanoid signatures and 1 distinctly mechanical presence. More interesting was the strange energy emanating from one of them. It reminded him of magicules but fundamentally different, more interconnected. Like individual consciousness tapping into a collective field. Incoming, he said calmly to his inner circle. 3 individuals, non-hostile intent based on approach pattern. One of them has some kind of energy manipulation ability. Benimaru's hand remained near his katana. Another military unit? I don't think so. Their equipment reads as civilian grade, and they're not broadcasting Imperial identification codes. Rimuru's analytical abilities processed available data. If I had to guess, I'd say these are locals who aren't happy with the occupation. Shuna tilted her head thoughtfully. Resistance fighters? Like the merchants we protected during the Western Nations conflict? Possibly. Rimuru watched as the 3 figures crested a nearby hill. Let's find out what they want before making assumptions. The lead figure was a green-skinned Twi'lek woman wearing pilot gear, her movements confident despite clearly recognizing she was approaching beings who just disarmed an entire Imperial garrison. Behind her walked a human male with a subtle wariness that suggested combat training, and a young woman in decorated Mandalorian armor carrying herself with the controlled aggression of someone who'd seen real battle. Hera Syndulla stopped at what she judged to be a respectful distance, close enough to communicate, far enough to retreat if necessary. Her first impression of the entities was disorienting. The leader appeared as a young humanoid with blue hair and golden eyes, almost innocent-looking if not for the way reality seemed to bend slightly around him. The others ranged from clearly inhuman to disturbingly powerful. The dragon, now in humanoid form, radiated barely contained energy that made her pilot instincts scream danger. "I'm Hera Syndulla," she called out clearly. "We're not with the Empire. We're concerned citizens who noticed you've had a difficult welcome to Lothal." Rimuru smiled slightly. "That's diplomatic phrasing for, we're rebels, isn't it?" Hera's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's the Empire's phrasing. We prefer freedom fighters." "Fair enough." Rimuru gestured welcomingly. "I'm Rimuru Tempest. This is part of my inner circle, Veldora, Benimaru, Shuna, Ranga, Geld, and Gobta. The other two are currently having a productive conversation with your local Imperial commander about the finer points of ethical governance." Kanan felt the Force swirl with confusion around these beings. They were there, he could see them, hear them, sense their physical presence, but they left no impression in the Force itself. Like they were images projected from another reality entirely. "You're not from this galaxy," he said, not quite a question. "Perceptive." Rimuru studied the human male with interest. "And you're not quite human, are you? Or rather, you're human, but you're tapping into that omnipresent energy field we've been analyzing. What do you call it here? The Force?" Kanan's hand instinctively moved toward his hidden lightsaber, a defensive reflex he immediately regretted when the massive wolf creature's eyes tracked the movement with predatory precision. "Easy, Ranga," Rimuru said without looking. "They're nervous, not hostile." "Big difference. You can sense the Force?" Kanan asked carefully, wondering if he'd just revealed himself to potential enemies. "What my overly enthusiastic subordinate means," Benimaru said with military formality, "is that our leader values life and prefers diplomatic solutions when possible. However, we also have zero tolerance for tyranny and oppression. If your empire is doing what our intelligence suggests, they've made themselves our enemy regardless of our intentions." Veldora grinned widely. Translation: "We're probably going to wreck their whole operation because bullies make Rimuru angry. And when Rimuru gets angry, things tend to explode. Metaphorically. Sometimes literally." Hera felt hope spark for the first time in months, dangerous, fragile hope that could shatter as easily as trust. "If you're serious about opposing the Empire, we should talk strategy. But first, you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't just one garrison or one planet. The Empire controls most of the known galaxy. They have superweapons, billions of troops, and a Sith Lord who—" "Sith?" Rimuru interrupted, his analytical mind immediately flagging the term. "Another Force tradition? Related to your Jedi?" Kanan's expression darkened. "The Sith are Force users who embrace anger, fear, and hatred. They nearly destroyed the Jedi Order and helped create the Empire. Emperor Palpatine himself is a Sith Lord, and his enforcer, Darth Vader, is perhaps the most dangerous being in the galaxy." Rimuru absorbed this information, his thought acceleration processing implications at superhuman speed. Authoritarian empire, dark side Force users in positions of ultimate power, systematic oppression across multiple worlds, and a resistance movement fighting with minimal resources against overwhelming odds. It was depressingly familiar. "Well," Rimuru said finally, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd fought similar battles before, "I think we need to have a longer conversation." But first, I want to hear what your empire has to say for itself. Commander Titus is about to have a very enlightening discussion about governance philosophies. In the distance, a scream echoed from the direction of Base Delta 7, brief, terrified, and abruptly cut off. Diablo's methods, Rimuru sighed. Effective but theatrical. He's not actually torturing anyone, for the record. He just makes them think he might. Canon wasn't entirely reassured, but given what the Empire had done to countless innocents, he found it difficult to muster sympathy for Commander Titus's current predicament. So, Hera said, choosing to focus on the practical, do we have an alliance? Rimuru smiled, and for just a moment, Canon sensed something through the Force, not from Rimuru himself, but from the universe's reaction to his presence. Like reality itself was adjusting to accommodate something it hadn't expected. Let's call it a mutual interest in teaching bullies that there are consequences for their actions, Rimuru replied. Alliance implies long-term commitment, and we still need to get home eventually. But while we're here, anyone who enslaves populations and calls it peace is going to have a very bad time. Veldora cracked his knuckles enthusiastically. Finally. I was getting bored with all this standing around. Diablo had always appreciated the aesthetics of intimidation. In his millennia of existence as a primordial demon, he'd perfected the art of extracting information through psychological pressure rather than crude physical torture. It was cleaner, more elegant, and, most importantly, it amused him tremendously to watch powerful beings realize just how powerless they truly were. Commander Brahm Titus was currently experiencing that realization in its purest form. The Imperial officer sat rigidly in his own command chair, surrounded by his subordinates who were frozen mid-motion like statues. Diablo had manipulated localized time flow around each person in the command center, leaving them conscious but unable to move, speak, or even blink. They could only watch as their commander faced judgment. Shall we begin? Diablo asked pleasantly, adjusting his immaculate black suit. I have several questions about Imperial governance, and you're going to provide detailed, honest answers. If you lie, I'll know. If you omit information, I'll know. If you try to justify atrocities with military necessity, I'll be disappointed, and you really don't want to disappoint me. Titus tried to maintain composure, but sweat beaded on his forehead. I don't know what you are, but threatening an Imperial officer is treason against the Emperor himself. When reinforcements arrive. Diablo's smile widened, and his eyes briefly flashed with something ancient and terrible. When reinforcements arrive, they'll find either a cooperative commander who's learned the value of honest dialogue, or they'll find a base whose entire command structure suffered simultaneous psychological breakdowns. The choice is entirely yours. He manifested a chair from shadow, literal darkness solidifying into furniture, and sat down with aristocratic grace. Now then. Question 1. How many labor camps does the Empire operate on Lothal, and what is their stated purpose versus their actual function? Titus's jaw clenched. That's classified information. Everything is classified until someone decides it isn't. Diablo leaned forward slightly. Let me explain something about my abilities, Commander. I can manipulate probability itself. Right now, there's a non-zero chance that every weapon system in this base spontaneously explodes. Or that your heart simply stops beating. Or that you suddenly remember every single person who's suffered because of orders you've carried out. His voice dropped to a whisper. I can make any of those probabilities approach certainty. So I'll ask again, the labor camps? The color drained from Titus's face. Whatever training the Empire provided for resisting interrogation, it hadn't prepared him for an entity that could casually discuss rewriting reality. 12 camps. Officially for processing local dissidents and training workforce for Imperial industrial projects. Unofficially, he swallowed hard. There's slave labor. Mining, manufacturing, agriculture. The quotas are deliberately impossible to meet. Failure results in executions as examples. And the children I detected in several facilities? Titus looked away. Imperial Youth Program. Orphans from families designated as seditious. They're raised as loyal Imperial citizens. You mean their parents are executed and their children are indoctrinated? Diablo's tone remained conversational, but something in the air grew heavier. How many children, Commander? 473 currently in youth program facilities on Lothal. So I materialized from shadow beside Diablo, his expression unreadable. The Oni assassin had been systematically infiltrating every section of the base, copying data files and mapping Imperial operations. Master Rimuru should hear this directly. The scope of oppression here is extensive. Agreed. Diablo stood smoothly. Commander Titus, you're going to do something unprecedented for an Imperial officer. You're going to show genuine remorse and cooperate fully with dismantling the systems you've helped maintain. Or. He gestured casually, and the frozen command center staff suddenly experienced shared perception, a brief, overwhelming glimpse of what Diablo truly was beneath his human facade. Primordial darkness that had existed since the universe's birth, power that made Force users seem like children playing with toys, and an absolute willingness to erase anyone who threatened his master's principles. The vision lasted only seconds, but several officers collapsed when time flow resumed, gasping and trembling. Or, Diablo continued pleasantly, you can refuse, and I'll be forced to take more direct action. I should mention that my master dislikes unnecessary casualties, so I'd have to be creative. Perhaps I'd simply make you and your staff psychologically incapable of following orders that cause suffering. A permanent compulsion toward ethical behavior. Some would consider that merciful. Titus understood with absolute clarity that he was facing something far beyond Imperial authority, beyond even the Emperor's reach. What do you want? Full data access. Complete intelligence on Imperial operations, not just Lothal, but regional command structure, fleet deployments, and any information on rebel activities you've gathered. Additionally, you will cease all operations in labor camps immediately and prepare facilities for inspection. I don't have authority to. Then acquire it. Diablo's smile was razor-sharp. Contact your superiors. Tell them unknown entities have compromised base security and are demanding compliance. Tell them resistance has been inadvisable. I'm certain Governor Price will be fascinated. Outside, Rimuru was conducting his own form of intelligence gathering, though considerably less theatrical. The Force was revealing its nature through careful analysis, and what he discovered both fascinated and troubled him. Shuna, he said quietly while Hera and Canon explained Rebel Alliance structure, what's your assessment of this Force energy? The Oni princess had been weaving analytical magic through the surrounding environment, her ultimate skill analyst deconstructing and categorizing the omnipresent field. It's alive, Master Rimuru. Not sentient exactly, but responsive. It has preferences. Light and dark aren't just metaphors, they're actual polarities within the field itself. When beings use it for selfless purposes, the Force flows easily. When used for selfish domination, it creates distortion. A universal energy with built-in moral framework, Rimuru mused. That's either incredibly convenient or incredibly dangerous depending on who's defining the morality. Benimaru had been listening to Canon describe Sith philosophy with growing concern. So these Sith lords gain power by embracing negative emotions? That sounds like Demon Lord territory. How powerful are we talking? Darth Vader single-handedly hunted down most of the surviving Jedi after the Clone Wars, Canon said, his voice carrying old pain. He can crush throats from across a room, deflect blaster bolts with a lightsaber, and his tactical genius is legendary. And he serves Emperor Palpatine, who orchestrated the fall of an entire galactic government while hiding in plain sight for decades. Veldora laughed, though not unkindly. You're describing what we'd call upper-tier threats in our world. Dangerous, definitely. Catastrophic, maybe. But apocalyptic? He shook his head. Rimuru's faced worse. We all have. Hera's tactical mind immediately recognized opportunity. If you've fought beings of that power level and survived. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Rimuru interrupted gently. Yes, we've fought powerful enemies. But we're not invincible, and rushing into conflict with Sith Lords without understanding their capabilities would be foolish. The Force gives them abilities we don't have experience countering. Actually, Shuna interjected thoughtfully, I think we'd be quite resistant to Force manipulation. Our magicule-based physiology operates on different principles. Mental attacks would encounter our intrinsic resistances, and physical Force abilities would need to overcome our natural defenses. Ranga, who had been quietly observing, spoke in his deep, resonant voice. Lord Rimuru, I detect no midichlorians in our bodies. If this Force requires such organisms to channel its power, then Force users cannot directly manipulate our internal energies the way they would with native beings. Canon blinked. You can detect midichlorians. That requires sophisticated medical scanning equipment. My master granted me enhanced perception abilities, Ranga replied simply. Your midichlorian count is approximately 11,000 per cell. High, but not extraordinarily so by historical Jedi standards if my analysis of available data is correct. The casual revelation that these beings could analyze midichlorian counts through observation alone sent a chill through Canon. What else could they perceive that Force users couldn't? Sabine, ever practical, steered conversation back to immediate concerns. Philosophical discussions aside, we have a tactical situation. The Empire knows you're here, they know you're powerful, and they're absolutely going to send reinforcements. Probably including Inquisitors or worse. We need to decide on next steps before Star Destroyers start arriving. Star Destroyers? Gupta asked nervously. That sounds really big and really bad. Wedge-shaped capital ships, approximately 1,600 meters long, carrying thousands of troops and hundreds of fighters, Geld rumbled, his analytical mind having processed available data. Devastating orbital bombardment capabilities. Primarily designed for projecting Imperial authority through overwhelming force. Hera stared at the Orc commander. How do you know our ship classifications? I've been analyzing electromagnetic transmissions and data networks within range. Your civilization broadcasts considerable information about its own military capabilities. Geld's expression remained neutral. It's tactically inadvisable, but it makes intelligence gathering remarkably easy. Right, Hera said slowly, recalibrating her assessment of these beings once again. So you've already hacked our communications and learned our military structure. That's actually incredibly useful for coordination. Rimuru felt Diablo and Soi returning through his mental connection, the sole corridor that linked him to his subordinates. A moment later, both materialized from shadow, and Diablo's expression carried unusual gravity. Master Rimuru, Diablo said formally, I believe you should hear Commander Titus's testimony directly. The scope of Imperial operations on this planet alone is extensive. War crimes, Soi added bluntly. By any reasonable definition. Systematic enslavement, forced indoctrination of children, summary executions, and cultural genocide. All documented and ordered through official Imperial channels. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Rimuru's expression hardened. Hera recognized that look, she'd worn it herself countless times when confronting Imperial atrocities. It was the expression of someone deciding that consequences were no longer theoretical. Show me, Rimuru said quietly. Diablo projected holographic data extracted from Imperial systems, files detailing labor camp operations, execution orders, resource extraction quotas designed to impoverish local populations, and most damning, correspondence between Governor Price and Imperial Command discussing Lothal's population as expendable resources. Canon felt the Force ripple strangely around Rimuru as he reviewed the evidence. Not through the Force itself, but as if reality was responding to something fundamental shifting in the slime's worldview. 473 children, Rimuru said finally, his voice carrying an edge that made even Veldora straighten attentively. Taken from families. Indoctrinated. Erased and remade into Imperial tools. Yes, Diablo confirmed. Rimuru looked at Hera directly. Your Rebel Alliance, what's your plan for liberating Lothal specifically? We've been conducting guerrilla operations, sabotaging Imperial facilities, smuggling out refugees when possible, Hera admitted. But we lack resources for direct confrontation. Our hope has been to inspire local resistance until the Alliance can commit larger forces, but, she trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging heavy. But you don't have the strength to free this world, and the Alliance is stretched too thin across too many systems to prioritize one planet, Rimuru finished. And in the meantime, people suffer. Yes. The admission clearly pained her. Rimuru was silent for a long moment, his analytical mind processing tactical options, moral imperatives, and practical limitations. He hadn't come to this universe seeking conflict. He wanted to return home, back to Tempest Federation where his friends and nation waited. But he'd also built his entire philosophy on protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, on standing against tyranny regardless of personal cost. Benimaru, he said finally, you're our military specialist. If we wanted to completely disable Imperial operations on Lothal without unnecessary casualties, how would you approach it? The Oni commander's eyes gleamed with tactical interest. Simultaneous strikes on communication infrastructure, power generation, and command centers. Disable fleet assets in orbit first to prevent orbital bombardment. Secure labor camps and civilian population centers immediately to prevent hostage situations. Estimated time to complete operation, 4 to 6 hours. Geld, can we relocate 400 children and approximately 17,000 enslaved laborers to secure locations? Yes, Master Rimuru. I can construct temporary shelters using earth manipulation. With Shuna's barrier magic for environmental control, they'll be safe and comfortable until more permanent solutions are implemented. Shuna, can you disrupt Imperial communications galaxy-wide long enough to prevent them from reporting our capabilities accurately? Easily. I can weave interference patterns through their entire network. They'll receive garbled reports at best. Rimuru turned back to Hera, and she saw something in his eyes that made her believe, truly believe, that change was possible. Phoenix Cell, we're going to make you an offer. We'll liberate Lothal completely. Every labor camp emptied, every Imperial military asset disabled, every child returned to whatever family remains or placed in protective care. We'll do this within 24 hours. Hera's breath caught. That's impossible. Even with your capabilities, the Empire has thousands of troops here and they're facing beings who've conquered demon lords, fought true dragons, and rebuilt entire civilizations from ashes, Veldora interrupted cheerfully. This is going to be fun. But, Rimuru continued seriously, we need something from you in return. Intelligence. Everything your alliance knows about Imperial structure, Sith capabilities, Force abilities, and most importantly, we need to understand if there are innocents within Imperial ranks. Soldiers who believe they're actually protecting people, officers who don't know about atrocities, anyone who might defect if given evidence of what their empire truly is. Canon understood immediately. You're trying to minimize casualties even among your enemies. I'm trying to avoid creating more victims, Rimuru corrected. Every stormtrooper who dies might have been a conscript who had no choice. Every officer we kill might have been someone who could have become an ally if shown truth. We'll defend ourselves absolutely, and we'll stop those who insist on causing harm. But we won't become executioners if alternatives exist. It was possibly the most Jedi philosophy Canon had heard from anyone since Order 66, and it came from an interdimensional being who casually discussed dismantling Imperial operations. Sabine pulled out her datapad. I'll start compiling everything we have. But you should know, once you do this, once you openly defy the Empire on this scale, there's no going back. They'll hunt you across the galaxy. Rimuru smiled slightly. They're welcome to try. But I suspect once we demonstrate what opposing tyranny actually looks like, your rebel alliance might find recruitment become significantly easier. In the Imperial Command Center, Commander Titus listened to his communications officer relay intercepted conversation from the grassland position. When she finished, he closed his eyes briefly. "Sir," she asked uncertainly. "Should we evacuate?" Titus thought about the labor camps he'd overseen, the execution orders he'd signed, the children taken from families under his authority. He'd told himself it was necessary, that the Empire brought order, that sacrifice was required for galactic stability. He'd been lying to himself. "No," he said quietly. "We're going to do something unprecedented. We're going to surrender. Completely. And then we're going to help them." His officers stared in shock. "That's treason," someone whispered. "No," Titus replied, feeling something like relief for the first time in years. "That's finally choosing the right side." In the Imperial Palace on Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine sat in his meditation chamber, surrounded by absolute darkness. The room existed in permanent shadow, lit only by the faint crimson glow of Sith artifacts that lined the walls, ancient relics from Korriban, Malakar, and a dozen other worlds steeped in dark side power. Here, the Emperor could extend his perception across the galaxy, feeling the ebb and flow of the Force like a spider sensing vibrations in its web. And something had just torn a hole in that web. It wasn't a disturbance in the Force. Those were common enough, from Jedi survivors to fledgling Force sensitives awakening to their powers. This was different. This was an absence, a void where the Force simply stopped, as if reality itself had developed a blind spot. Palpatine had felt it the moment it appeared above Lothal, a sensation like suddenly losing feeling in a limb. "Curious," he murmured, his withered fingers steepled before him. His yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness. Most curious indeed. He reached out through the Force, extending his perception toward Lothal with the full weight of his Sith mastery. What he found, or rather, what he didn't find, sent a rare flutter of uncertainty through his ancient mind. 9 distinct voids in the Force, each one a pocket of incomprehensible nothingness that his precognition simply couldn't penetrate. And around them, the Force itself seemed confused, attempting to categorize something it had no framework to understand. The holographic communicator on his armrest chimed. Palpatine allowed himself a thin smile. "Right on schedule." "Yes, Governor Price," he said, his voice carrying that grandfatherly tone he used to disguise his true nature. "I trust you have a fascinating explanation for the situation on Lothal." Governor Arinda Price's hologram materialized, and even through the blue-tinted projection, Palpatine could see her barely controlled panic. "Your Majesty, we have a code absolute situation. Unknown entities have appeared on Lothal with capabilities that exceed all Imperial threat assessments. Commander Titus reports complete weapons system failure across his entire garrison, infiltration of secure facilities without detection, and he claims one of them is a dragon, my lord." A dragon. Palpatine let the word hang in the air. How delightfully mythological. "And what does Commander Titus recommend?" Price swallowed hard. "He's requesting permission to surrender, Your Majesty. He believes resistance would result in massive casualties with no strategic benefit." In any other situation, Palpatine would have had Titus executed for cowardice and replaced within the hour. But the Force was whispering warnings, faint, uncertain whispers that suggested caution rather than immediate action. These entities, whatever they were, existed outside his understanding of the universe's fundamental laws. That made them either an unprecedented opportunity or an existential threat. Possibly both. "Tell Commander Titus that his request is denied," Palpatine said smoothly. "However, he is authorized to negotiate. I want to understand what these entities are, what they want, and most importantly, whether they can be brought to serve the Empire." His eyes narrowed. "And Governor Price, dispatch the Third Fleet to Lothal immediately. They are not to engage unless provoked, but I want sufficient force present to discourage any ambitious plans these visitors might harbor." "Yes, Your Majesty." "And should I alert Lord Vader?" Palpatine considered. Vader was currently engaged in hunting rebel cells in the mid-rim, and his presence might escalate the situation unnecessarily. But on the other hand, if these entities proved hostile and powerful enough to challenge even Vader, it would be better to know sooner rather than later. Inform Lord Vader of the situation but do not recall him yet. This requires observation first. Action later. As Price's hologram faded, Palpatine rose from his throne and approached the chamber's observation window. Beyond the transparisteel, Coruscant's endless cityscape stretched to the horizon, trillions of beings living under his absolute control. He had spent decades orchestrating the fall of the Jedi, the rise of the Empire, and the consolidation of galactic power. He had foreseen every major threat, manipulated every significant player, and positioned himself as the galaxy's undisputed master. But he had not foreseen this. Master Yoda once warned the Council about the shrinking of our precognition, he mused aloud, a rare moment of honest reflection. He believed the dark side was clouding their vision. But what if the truth was simpler? What if there are simply things the Force cannot see? The thought was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. After a lifetime of using the Force to predict, manipulate, and dominate, Palpatine was confronting the possibility that his ultimate weapon had limitations he'd never considered. He would need to be careful. Very careful. On Lothal, Rimuru had no idea he'd just drawn the personal attention of the galaxy's most dangerous Sith Lord. He was too busy coordinating what he was mentally calling Operation, actually help people instead of talking about it. So he said, reviewing tactical displays that Geld had generated from stolen Imperial data, I need complete reconnaissance of all 12 labor camps. Guard positions, patrol patterns, civilian locations, and any defensive systems. But I also need you to identify which guards are actually cruel versus which ones are just following orders out of fear. The Oni assassin nodded, already fading into shadow. Understood. I'll have complete intelligence within 30 minutes. Rimuru, you're taking Geld and Gobta to disable the Imperial garrison's power systems and communications arrays. Non-lethal takedowns only. Anyone who surrenders immediately gets restrained and moved to a secure location for later questioning. Anyone who fights gets disabled but not killed unless absolutely necessary. Understood, Rimuru-sama. Benimaru's flames flickered with barely contained eagerness. Though I must ask, if we encounter Force users, what's the engagement protocol? Assess first. If they're Inquisitors hunting Jedi or enforcing tyranny, full combat authorization. If they're confused Imperials who happen to be Force-sensitive, same rules apply, disable, don't destroy. Rimuru glanced at Kanan. Will these Inquisitors be a significant threat? Kanan's expression darkened. They're former Jedi who were either corrupted or broke under torture. Dangerous combatants with lightsabers and dark side abilities. But from what I've seen of your capabilities, he trailed off, uncertain. We'll be fine, Benimaru said with absolute confidence. I've fought demon lords who could manipulate souls themselves. Dark side users who rely on anger and fear are tactically predictable. Shuna stepped forward, her analytical magic still weaving through local space. Master Rimuru, I've completed my analysis of Imperial communication networks. I can disrupt their entire regional grid, but it will take significant concentration. I'll need to remain stationary. Veldora will guard you, Rimuru decided. Anyone tries to interrupt your work, he has full authorization to demonstrate why attacking a true dragon is a poor life choice. Kohaha. Finally. Veldora's grin was practically incandescent. I promise I won't destroy too much. That's not as reassuring as you think it is, Rimuru muttered. He turned to Ranga. You and I are handling the labor camps directly. We'll start with the youth program facilities, those children are our first priority. Hera had been listening with growing amazement and concern. You're splitting up. That's tactically risky. If the Empire concentrates forces on one group, then that group will handle it, Rimuru said simply. Hera, I know you're used to operating with limited resources where every loss is catastrophic. But we're not normal soldiers. Rimuru alone could probably handle your entire Imperial garrison if he had to. Splitting up lets us cover more ground and minimize civilian exposure to combat. Sabine pulled up a holographic map. If you're serious about hitting all 12 camps simultaneously, you'll need precise timing. The moment the first camp goes dark, Imperial Command will lock down the others and potentially execute prisoners to prevent liberation. Which is why Shuna's disrupting communications first, Rimuru explained. They won't be able to coordinate a response. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be over. Diablo materialized from shadow, his expression carrying unusual satisfaction. Master Rimuru, Commander Titus has provided complete data access. Imperial troop positions, fleet deployment schedules, supply routes, and, most interesting, classified information about a project called Death Star. His smile turned predatory. Apparently, the Empire is building a space station capable of destroying entire planets. The temperature in the air seemed to drop several degrees. I'm sorry, Cannon said slowly. Did you say destroy entire planets? Superlaser powered by Kyber crystals, designed to demonstrate Imperial authority through planetary genocide, Diablo confirmed. According to the files, it's currently under construction in the Outer Rim. Estimated completion, approximately 1 year. Rimuru's expression became absolutely glacial. They're building a weapon to destroy planets. Not military targets. Not fleets. Planets. Billions of people erased to prove a point. Hera's face had gone pale. We'd heard rumors, intelligence fragments about a superweapon project. But we thought it was propaganda, that nothing that destructive was actually possible. If this is real. It's real, Diablo interrupted. I have technical specifications, construction timelines, and even test firing results. They've already successfully destroyed a planetoid as proof of concept. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. Should I arrange for the project to experience catastrophic structural failures, my lord? Rimuru was silent for a long moment, his analytical mind racing through implications. A weapon that could destroy worlds represented a level of militaristic insanity that eclipsed anything he'd faced before. Even the Eastern Empire at its most aggressive hadn't contemplated genocide on a planetary scale. Not yet, he said finally. If we sabotage it now, they'll just rebuild with better security. We need to understand the full scope of Imperial operations first. His eyes met Hera's. Your rebel alliance, do they know about this Death Star? Some leadership might, she admitted. But if they do, they haven't shared it with cells like ours. We're compartmentalized for security. Then that's our first priority after Lothal is secured. Getting this information to your alliance leadership and helping them understand that this isn't just another military project. This is an extinction-level threat that makes everything else secondary. Cannon felt the force swirl with dark premonition. If the Emperor is willing to build something like this, he's not going to let you interfere with his plans unopposed. You're going to draw his full attention. Good, Rimuru said, and there was nothing warm or friendly in his tone now. Let him come. Let him send his fleets, his inquisitors, his Sith lords. Because I want him to understand something very clearly, there are powers in the universe that don't bow to tyranny, that don't break under oppression, and that absolutely will not tolerate genocide as a political tool. Veldora's aura flared, storm clouds gathering overhead in response to his brother's anger. Finally we're on the same page. I was starting to think we were just going to talk these Empire people to death. Benimaru's hand rested on his katana, black flames already flickering around the blade. What are our rules of engagement if we encounter this Emperor or his apprentice? Rimuru's answer was immediate and absolute. If you encounter Darth Vader, disable but don't kill if possible, he might be redeemable. If you encounter Emperor Palpatine. His golden eyes hardened. No mercy. No negotiation. Someone willing to build a planet-destroying weapon has forfeited their right to exist. The casual declaration of intent to execute a galactic emperor sent a chill through the assembled rebels. This wasn't bravado or empty threat. This was a being who had already decided that certain lines, once crossed, demanded absolute consequences. Now then, Rimuru said, his voice returning to its normal calm efficiency. Let's free some slaves, liberate some children, and show this empire what happens when they mistake patience for weakness. Everyone know their assignments? A chorus of affirmatives answered him. Then let's begin. And remember, we're here to help people, not rack up a body count. Every Imperial soldier who surrenders is one more person who might join the right side once they understand what they've been serving. Every life we save is a victory. Every unnecessary death is a failure. It was the kind of idealistic philosophy that would have seemed naive coming from anyone else. But from a being who just casually discussed confronting Sith Lords and sabotaging superweapons, it carried a strange kind of weight. As the inner circle dispersed to their assigned tasks, Hera pulled Kanan aside. "Are we making a mistake?" she whispered. "Allying with beings this powerful, this willing to challenge the Empire directly?" Kanan watched Rimuru create a perfect holographic map of Lothal from nothing but analyzed data, his supernatural abilities making the impossible look routine. "I don't think we're allying with them, Hera. I think we're just along for the ride while they do what they were always going to do. Which is teach the galaxy that the Empire isn't invincible." Kanan's hand touched his lightsaber. "And honestly, after everything we've seen, everything we've lost, I think the galaxy needs that lesson." In orbit above Lothal, 3 Imperial Star Destroyers dropped out of hyperspace, the vanguard of the Third Fleet, arriving to contain the situation. Their sensors immediately began scanning for the unknown entities, sophisticated equipment designed to track everything from cloaked ships to Force-sensitive individuals. They found nothing. On the bridge of the lead destroyer, Captain Brunson stared at empty sensor screens with growing confusion. "Run diagnostics. There's no way 9 large entities simply disappear." "Diagnostics complete, sir. Systems are functioning normally. The entities are just, not there." "They're there," Brunson muttered. "They have to be there. Things don't just vanish." But as Rimuru and his inner circle moved into position across Lothal, shifting through shadows, teleporting through space, and moving at speeds that made mockery of conventional tracking, the Empire was learning a hard lesson. When you built your entire military philosophy around controlling the Force and overwhelming firepower, you weren't prepared for enemies who operated on entirely different rules. And that oversight was about to become very, very costly. The Imperial Youth Program Facility 7 sat in Lothal's eastern highlands, a deliberately isolated complex surrounded by electrified fencing and automated defense turrets. The architects had designed it to look almost pleasant from the outside, clean white walls, manicured gardens, even a recreational courtyard visible through transparent steel windows. It was meant to project the image of a benevolent institution preparing young minds for productive Imperial service. Inside, the reality was considerably darker. Rimuru and Ranga materialized from shadow in the facility's central administration building, bypassing every sensor, alarm, and security checkpoint through a combination of spatial manipulation and SOI's pre-infiltration intelligence. The administration wing was mostly empty at this hour, late evening local time, when most staff had retired to their quarters and only skeleton security remained on duty. 6 guards on perimeter patrol, 4 stationed at the dormitory wings, 2 in the security office, Rimuru murmured, his universal perception painting a complete picture of the facility's layout and personnel. And 473 children, ages ranging from 4 to 16, all housed in gender-segregated dormitories with biometric locks. Ranga's wolf form rippled with barely contained fury. "Lord Rimuru, I can smell their fear even from here. These children are terrified. The emotional residue in this place," he growled low in his throat. "This is not a school. This is a prison." "I know. Rimuru's voice was soft but carried an edge that would have made anyone familiar with him take several steps back. Which is why we're going to be very careful about how we handle this. These children have been traumatized, indoctrinated, separated from everything they knew. We can't just burst in and expect them to trust us immediately. He reached out through his network of magical perception, analyzing the facility's systems with Raphael's assistance, his ultimate skill processing data faster than any computer. The biometric locks were sophisticated but ultimately mechanical. The surveillance systems were state-of-the-art but relied on technology that assumed conventional methods of infiltration. The guards were trained professionals but had clearly grown complacent after years of facing no real threats. Ranga, I need you to put the perimeter guards to sleep. Your shadow manipulation can carry sedative effects, correct? Yes, Lord Rimuru. They'll sleep for several hours with no lasting harm. Good. Do it quietly. I'm going to access the facility's central database and figure out which of these children still have surviving family members. Once we liberate them, we'll need to know where to take them. Ranga dissolved into living shadow, flowing through the facility like darkness given predatory purpose. Within minutes, all 6 exterior guards had collapsed into peaceful unconscious states, their bodies carefully positioned to avoid injury. Rimuru watched through his perception as Ranga worked, appreciating the precision and care his friend took even with enemies. Meanwhile, Rimuru interfaced directly with the facility's computer systems. It should have been impossible. The Imperial networks used proprietary architecture with multiple layers of encryption and biometric security. But Raphael analyzed and cracked each layer in microseconds, granting him complete administrative access. What he found in the database made his blood run cold. Each child had a file. Name, age, origin world, family status, psychological profile, indoctrination progress, and recommended disposal methods for those deemed unsuitable for Imperial service. Rimuru read through entry after entry, his analytical mind processing hundreds of tragic stories simultaneously. Subject 73, male, age 8, father executed for sedition, mother location unknown, shows persistent attachment to pre-imperial cultural practices, recommended for advanced reconditioning or termination. Subject 127, female, age 12, both parents executed for rebel collaboration, exhibits exceptional intelligence, suitable for Intelligence Bureau recruitment after loyalty conditioning is complete. Subject 229, male, age 6, orphan during pacification operations on Ryloth, displays concerning empathy toward non-human species, requires intensive species hierarchy education. On and on it went, 473 lives reduced to clinical assessments and cold calculations about their utility to an empire built on cruelty. Rimuru closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. Anger was useful, but only if controlled. Rage led to mistakes, and these children deserved better than a rescue operation compromised by emotional reaction. Raphael, he thought, cross-referenced these children's family information with Soai's intelligence on Lothal's population. I want to know exactly how many have surviving relatives who can take them in. Analysis complete. 147 children have confirmed surviving family members on Lothal. 93 have possible relatives on other worlds. 233 are completely orphaned with no surviving family members in Imperial databases. 233 children with nowhere to go. Children who had lost everything and been further victimized by the very empire that had destroyed their families. Then they'll come with us, Rimuru decided. Temporarily, at least, until we can find proper homes for them. The Tempest Federation was built by monsters and humans who had nowhere else to go. We can certainly accommodate children who need sanctuary. He pulled up the facility's communication systems and composed a message in perfect High Galactic, his linguistic abilities allowing him to match the formal tone of Imperial documentation. Imperial Youth Program Facility 7, Administrative Notice. Facility evacuation ordered by Authority Code Omega 77. All children to be relocated to secured sanctuary location. Non-essential personnel to stand down. Resistance will be considered obstruction of imperial authority. Compliance is mandatory. This is not a drill. He broadcast the message to every screen, speaker, and datapad in the facility simultaneously, then used his matter manipulation abilities to unlock every door between the dormitories and the main courtyard. Throughout the facility, children startled awake as lights flickered on and doors slid open without human intervention. In the security office, the two remaining guards stared at their consoles in confusion as unauthorized commands executed themselves despite their locked controls. "What in the... who authorized this?" one demanded, frantically trying to regain system access. "I don't know. The codes are legitimate, but I don't recognize the authority signature." The second guard reached for his comlink. "Central Command, this is Facility 7, we have a..." Ranga materialized behind them, shadow condensing into his wolf form for just a moment before his presence overwhelmed their conscious minds. Both guards collapsed peacefully, joining their comrades in magically induced sleep. "All guards neutralized, Lord Rimuru," Ranga reported. "The children are emerging from dormitories. They appear confused but not panicked." "Good. Let's introduce ourselves." Carefully. Rimuru walked into the central courtyard where 473 children were gathering in uncertain clusters, most still wearing sleep clothes, all looking around with expressions ranging from confusion to cautious hope to deep-seated fear. They'd been conditioned to expect authority figures to punish any deviation from routine, and this was definitely a deviation. A few of the older teenagers noticed Rimuru first, a young man with blue hair and golden eyes who looked barely older than themselves, wearing clothes that didn't match any imperial uniform they recognized. He stood calmly in the center of the courtyard, utterly unthreatening in posture, but there was something about him that commanded attention. "Hello," Rimuru said, pitching his voice to carry across the courtyard without shouting. "My name is Rimuru Tempest. I know you're confused right now, and probably scared. That's completely understandable. But I need you to listen carefully, because I'm going to tell you 3 things, and all of them are true." The children fell silent, years of conditioning making them default to listening when adults spoke with authority. "First, the people who run this facility have been lying to you. Your parents, the ones who they told you were criminals, traitors, enemies of order, most of them were innocent. They were killed because they stood up against injustice, because they refused to accept cruelty as normal, because they loved you more than they feared the Empire." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled children. Several of the older ones looked angry, a few looked hopeful, and many looked terrified at hearing such open sedition. "Second, you are not imperial property. You are not tools to be shaped and used. You are children who deserve to grow up safe, loved, and free to become whoever you choose to be. And no government, no matter how powerful, has the right to tell you otherwise." One of the teenage girls found her voice, trembling but defiant. "You're rebel scum. The instructors told us about people like you. You lie to turn loyal citizens against the peace the Empire provides." Rimuru didn't get angry. He'd expected this. "That's what they taught you, yes. And I understand why you believe it. These people have been your only source of information for years. But I'm going to prove something to you right now, something that no Empire loyalist would ever do." He raised his hand, and the massive holographic display that usually showed Imperial propaganda flickered to life with new content. Data files began scrolling, the actual files from the facility's database, unedited and damning. Children could see their own profiles, read the clinical assessments about their disposability, see the casualty reports about their parents' executions listed with as much emotion as supply inventory. "I'm showing you the truth," Rimuru said quietly as children began reading, as the reality of their situation crystallized in front of their eyes. "The actual files that the Empire keeps about you. You can see for yourselves what they really think, what they really plan, what they really are." Silence fell across the courtyard as 473 children confronted documentation of their own dehumanization. Some began crying quietly. Others looked numb with shock. A few of the older ones started visibly shaking with rage as they read about parents who had been executed and then slandered in official records. And third, Rimuru continued, his voice gentle now, you have a choice. I've disabled this facility's security and communications. The adults here who were keeping you imprisoned are currently sleeping peacefully, they're not hurt, just unable to interfere. In about 30 minutes, more of my friends will arrive with transportation. Anyone who wants to can come with us to a safe place where you'll be protected, fed, and given time to heal. For those of you who have family on Lothal, we'll reunite you with them immediately. For those who don't. He paused, making sure every child could see his face, see his honesty. For those who don't, you'll be offered sanctuary in my nation until we can find you proper homes. Or, if you want, you can stay. We're building something in my world, a place where people aren't judged by their species, their origins, or their past. A place where strength is used to protect others, not to dominate them. You'd be welcome there, if you choose. A younger boy, maybe 7 years old, raised his hand tentatively. Are you going to hurt the instructors? Some of them were nice. Instructor Keela gave me extra food when I was sick. Rimuru smiled warmly at the child's concern even for his captors. No, we're not going to hurt anyone who doesn't force us to. The instructors who were genuinely kind will be given opportunities to make better choices. The ones who were cruel will face justice, but not violence. I've lived by a simple principle, protect those who can't protect themselves, and give everyone a chance to be better than they were. An older teenage boy with Twi'lek features stepped forward, his leku twitching with emotion. Why? Why would you do this? You're clearly not from here, you don't even register on security scanners, you just appeared. You have power we can't even understand. Why would you care about a bunch of imprisoned kids on some nowhere planet? It was a fair question, and Rimuru gave it the honest answer it deserved. Because I was weak once. I died alone and confused, and when I woke up in a new world, I was powerless and vulnerable. I could have died a dozen times over if not for people who chose to help me despite having no obligation to do so. I built my entire nation on a simple idea, that strength exists to protect others, and power without compassion is just tyranny with better weapons. He looked at each child, meeting their eyes. You're not statistics. You're not resources. You're people who deserve better than what you've been given. And as long as I'm in this galaxy, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you get that chance. Ranga chose that moment to materialize in his full Tempest Star Wolf form, massive, silver-furred, with eyes that glowed with supernatural intelligence. Several children gasped, but Rimuru's hand on Ranga's neck was gentle, affectionate. This is Ranga, one of my closest friends and strongest protectors. He's going to help keep you safe during the evacuation. I know he looks intimidating, but I promise he's much more interested in protecting you than scaring you. Ranga lowered his massive head, allowing the nearest children to see that despite his predatory appearance, his eyes held only concern. Lord Rimuru speaks truly. You are under our protection now. No harm will come to you. A small girl, maybe 5 years old, stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of young children who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of everything. She reached out and touched Ranga's fur, her eyes widening. He's soft. Very soft, Ranga confirmed, his rumbling voice somehow gentle. Would you like to ride on my back during the evacuation? It will be faster and more comfortable than walking. The girl nodded enthusiastically, and something broke in the tension. Other children started moving forward, asking questions, some crying with relief, others still uncertain but willing to hope. Rimuru felt Benimaru's mental communication through their soul corridor. Rimuru-sama, Imperial power grade is down, communications are disrupted, and we've secured the garrison. Geld is preparing transport vehicles for the children. SOI reports that 11 other facilities are now secure. Total liberated, 4,873 enslaved individuals, including the children. Any casualties? None on our side. 17 Imperial guards requested to join the Rebel Alliance after learning what they'd been protecting. 43 others surrendered peacefully. 5 resisted and were disabled non-lethally. 0 fatalities. Rimuru felt satisfaction mixed with relief. They were doing this right. Liberating without becoming executioners, demonstrating that you could oppose tyranny without becoming tyrannical yourself. Above Lothal, the Imperial Third Fleet was learning that their sensors weren't malfunctioning, the targets were simply moving through spacetime in ways that rendered conventional tracking meaningless. By the time they'd triangulated one position, the subject had already completed their objective and moved on. Captain Brunson was beginning to understand that this wasn't a tactical situation. This was a demonstration. These entities were showing the Empire that all their overwhelming military might, all their technological superiority, all their carefully constructed authority meant exactly nothing when faced with beings who operated on fundamentally different principles. "Sir," his sensor officer said quietly, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures across Lothal's surface. Every Imperial installation is going dark simultaneously. It's like someone flipped a switch on our entire planetary operation." Brunson closed his eyes. "Get me a secure line to Coruscant. The Emperor needs to know that Lothal has fallen without a single shot being fired." In the courtyard of Facility 7, Rimuru watched as 473 children, some still wary, some openly crying with relief, all fundamentally changed by the last hour, prepared to leave their prison behind. Geld had arrived with transport vehicles, large and comfortable and completely unlike Imperial military transports. "Ready?" Rimuru asked the group. The Twi'lek teenager who'd questioned him earlier stepped forward. "We're ready. And, thank you. I don't know if we'll ever see our real families again, but at least now we have a chance. That's more than we had an hour ago." "You'll see them again," Rimuru promised. "One way or another, I'll make sure of it. Every single one of you deserves that reunion." As the children began boarding transports, escorted by Geld's gentle protection and Rhonda's vigilant guardianship, Rimuru allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was why he built the Tempest Federation. This was why power mattered, not for domination, but for protection. Not to rule, but to free. Somewhere in the galaxy, Emperor Palpatine was plotting his response to these interdimensional intruders. Let him plot. Rimuru had 4,873 reasons to make sure that any confrontation ended with the Empire learning that some powers didn't negotiate with tyrants. They simply removed them. Lord Darth Vader stood on the bridge of the Star Destroyer Devastator, studying tactical displays with the focused intensity that had made him the Empire's most feared enforcer. His meditation had been interrupted by an urgent transmission from Governor Price, reports of unknown entities on Lothal with capabilities that defied conventional analysis. The Emperor had ordered observation rather than immediate action, but Vader's instincts, honed through decades of combat and tempered by the dark side, told him this situation required personal attention. "Hyperspace jump complete, my lord," Admiral Constantine reported, his voice carefully neutral. The Admiral had learned long ago that showing fear around Vader was dangerous, but showing no caution was suicidal. "We're holding position at the edge of the Lothal system. Long-range sensors are attempting to locate the entities, but they are not there," Vader finished, his mechanical breathing the only sound in the suddenly quiet bridge. "Because they do not exist within the Force. Show me the recordings from the garrison." The holographic display flickered to life, showing grainy footage of the initial encounter, the TIE fighters' weapons failing without visible cause, the massive dragon manifestation, and most intriguing, the slender figure who had spoken with absolute confidence despite facing an Imperial garrison. The recording quality was poor, disrupted by some form of electromagnetic interference that Imperial technicians couldn't explain, but Vader could see enough. The leader, this Rimuru Tempest, moved wrong. Not wrong in the sense of unusual combat technique or alien physiology, but wrong in a way that Vader's Force sensitivity couldn't categorize. When Vader extended his perception through the Force toward the recordings, seeking to understand these entities through residual impressions, he found nothing. Not darkness, not light, not even the neutral emptiness of inanimate objects. Just absence. My lord, Constantine continued carefully, we've received updated reports. The entities have systematically disabled every Imperial installation on Lothal. 12 labor camps emptied, the main garrison surrendered without significant casualties, and approximately 5,000 individuals, primarily enslaved workers and children from youth program facilities, have been relocated to unknown locations. Vader's mechanical breathing quickened slightly, the only external sign of his reaction. Casualties? Minimal, my lord. Fewer than 10 seriously injured, none dead. The entities appeared to prioritize non-lethal confrontation. Several Imperial personnel have defected to local rebel cells after being shown evidence of facility operations. Evidence. Vader's voice carried dangerous undertones. He understood immediately what had happened. These entities had accessed classified files, exposed the Empire's methods to its own soldiers, and turned loyalty through information rather than violence. It was tactically brilliant and strategically devastating. More concerning was their restraint. The Empire's enemies typically fought with desperation, using whatever means necessary to inflict damage. These beings had the power to destroy, the recordings made that clear, but chose precision instead. That suggested either remarkable discipline or a moral framework that valued life even during conflict. Vader knew from personal experience that such enemies were far more dangerous than mere killers. Transmission from Coruscant, the communications officer announced. The Emperor wishes to speak with you directly, Lord Vader. The bridge crew immediately found reasons to focus intently on their consoles, none wanting to witness whatever conversation was about to occur. Vader moved to his private meditation chamber, sealing the door before activating the holographic communicator. Emperor Palpatine's projection materialized, his hooded figure somehow imposing even through the blue-tinted hologram. Lord Vader. You have reviewed the situation on Lothal? Yes, my master. The entities demonstrate capabilities beyond conventional threat assessment. They operate outside the Force's influence, suggesting either interdimensional origin or technology that mimics such conditions. Your thoughts on engagement strategy? Vader considered carefully. Palpatine valued decisive action, but also recognized when caution served Imperial interests better than aggression. Direct confrontation would be premature. We lack sufficient understanding of their capabilities, and their demonstrated restraint suggests they are not immediately hostile to all Imperial presence, only to operations they deem morally objectionable. An interesting observation. Palpatine's tone carried amusement and calculation in equal measure. You believe they can be negotiated with? I believe they operate according to principles that can be understood and potentially exploited. The leader, this Rimuru Tempest, prioritized civilian protection and explicitly avoided unnecessary casualties. Such behavior indicates exploitable patterns. Or it indicates weakness, Palpatine countered. Beings who hesitate to kill are beings who can be overwhelmed through attrition and ruthless application of force. Perhaps, my master. But I would recommend a more surgical approach initially. Allow me to make contact directly. I will assess their true capabilities and determine whether they represent opportunity or threat. There was a long pause. Vader could feel Palpatine's consideration through their connection in the Force, the Sith Lord's mind working through countless permutations and possibilities. Very well, Lord Vader. You may approach Lothal and initiate contact with these entities. Determine their nature, their objectives, and their limitations. But be cautious, they have already demonstrated the ability to disable our forces without triggering a single casualty alert. I would prefer not to lose my apprentice to unknown variables. The concern was calculated rather than genuine, but Vader acknowledged it nonetheless. As you wish, my master. I will not underestimate them. As Palpatine's hologram faded, Vader stood in the darkness of his meditation chamber, reaching out through the Force to sense the currents of destiny surrounding this encounter. What he felt was nothing. Not the void of future sight being blocked, but genuine absence, as if he were attempting to predict the path of something that didn't exist in the timeline's natural flow. Anakin Skywalker had been the chosen one, prophesied to bring balance to the Force. Darth Vader had spent decades enforcing the Empire's will through fear and overwhelming power. But neither identity had prepared him for encountering beings who existed entirely outside the cosmic framework that defined his entire existence. Admiral Constantine, Vader's voice carried through the ship's internal comm system, "Prepare my shuttle. I will approach Lothal personally. The fleet is to maintain defensive positions but not engage unless directly attacked." "My lord, is that wise? We have no intelligence on their anti-ship capabilities. Your concern is noted and dismissed. Prepare my shuttle." "Yes, my lord." On Lothal's surface, Rimuru was coordinating the massive logistical operation of relocating nearly 5,000 liberated individuals when Raphael alerted him to an incoming threat signature. "Warning, extremely powerful individual approaching from orbit. Classification, unknown. Force signature, catastrophic level. Preliminary analysis suggests this may be Darth Vader based on Imperial communication intercepts." Rimuru straightened, his relaxed posture shifting to full alertness. Around him, his inner circle immediately noticed the change. "What is it, Rimuru-sama?" Benimaru asked, hand already moving toward his katana. "Darth Vader. He's coming here personally." Rimuru's analytical abilities processed available information about the Sith Lord, former Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, fell to the dark side, responsible for hunting down surviving Jedi after Order 66, cyborg life support systems, master of Form V lightsaber combat, and Force abilities that made him nearly unstoppable in one-on-one combat. The famous Sith Enforcer, Diablo said with evident interest. "How delightful. Shall I arrange an appropriate welcome?" "No. I'll meet with him directly." Rimuru held up a hand to forestall the immediate protests. "Listen, Vader is powerful, but more importantly, he's Palpatine's direct representative. How we handle this encounter will determine whether the Empire sees us as potential allies, potential threats, or immediate enemies requiring total war." Kanan, who had been helping coordinate refugee transport with Hera's rebel cell, stepped forward urgently. "Rimuru, you don't understand. Vader isn't just powerful, he's a force of nature. I've seen recordings of him tearing through Jedi Masters like they were children. And he serves the dark side completely. There's no negotiating with him." "Maybe," Rimuru acknowledged. "But there's also a man under that armor. Anakin Skywalker, who fell to save someone he loved. That suggests he's not just a mindless destroyer. He's someone who made terrible choices for understandable reasons." "That was before," Kanan insisted. "Whatever Anakin was, Vader destroyed him. The man in that armor now is pure dark side." Rimuru studied Kanan's expression, the fear, the pain, the trauma of Order 66 still written in his eyes. "I hear you. And I'm not going to be naive about this. But I've fought beings who were supposed to be pure evil, unredeemable monsters. And sometimes, even in the darkest places, there's still a spark of something worth saving." Shuna approached, her analytical magic already working. "Master Rimuru, I should accompany you. If Darth Vader attempts force manipulation, I can counter it. And my barrier techniques would protect against lightsaber strikes." "No. If I bring backup, he'll see it as preparation for combat. I need to meet him alone, demonstrate that I'm not afraid of him, but also not looking for a fight." Rimuru's expression turned serious. "But I want everyone on standby. If this goes badly, if Vader proves to be exactly what Kanan fears, then I'll need you to evacuate all the civilians immediately. Don't try to fight him to rescue me, just get everyone to safety." "Rimuru-sama," Benimaru's voice carried both protest and loyalty, "we're not leaving you to face an unknown threat alone. You're not leaving me. You're protecting 5,000 people who are counting on us. That's more important than my safety." Rimuru smiled, trying to ease the tension. Besides, I've got Raphael analyzing every scrap of data about Vader. I'm going into this with more information than he has about me. Tactical advantage is still on our side. Veldora cracked his knuckles, storm clouds gathering overhead reflexively. If this Vader guy hurts my brother, I'm going to show this galaxy what happens when you make a true dragon angry. Just saying. Noted. Try not to destroy any planets while you're at it. No promises. Rimuru felt the approaching shuttle through his universal perception, a Lambda-class transport escorted by TIE fighters, descending toward the former Imperial garrison's landing platform. The shuttle's passenger radiated power in a way that Rimuru's senses could barely categorize. It wasn't magicule-based, but it was definitely supernatural. The Force, focused and weaponized through decades of rage, pain, and iron discipline. Here we go, Rimuru muttered, teleporting himself to the landing platform in a flicker of spatial distortion. He arrived to find the shuttle touching down with mechanical precision, its wings folding upward as landing struts extended. The boarding ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and from the darkness within emerged a figure that had haunted the nightmares of rebels and Jedi survivors across the galaxy. Darth Vader stood over 2 meters tall, his black armor gleaming in Lothal's sunlight. The iconic helmet, the flowing cape, the mechanical breathing that sounded like death's approach, everything about him was designed to intimidate, to instill fear, to announce that resistance was futile. Rimuru stood calmly, hands relaxed at his sides, his posture neither aggressive nor submissive. Just, present. Waiting. Vader descended the ramp slowly, each step measured and deliberate. He stopped approximately 5 meters from Rimuru, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Vader extended his Force senses toward this being who had systematically dismantled Imperial operations on an entire planet, and found the same inexplicable absence that had troubled him on the recordings. Rimuru Tempest, Vader's voice resonated through his vocabulator, deep and mechanical and somehow still conveying absolute authority. You have interfered with Imperial operations, liberated Imperial prisoners, and turned Imperial soldiers against their oaths. Explain yourself. Rimuru met the Sith Lord's gaze directly, or at least, met the cold gaze of Vader's helmet's optical sensors. I arrived in your galaxy by accident. I was immediately attacked without communication or provocation. During my investigation of why I was attacked, I discovered systematic slavery, child abduction, cultural genocide, and an empire built on fear and suffering. So I freed people who were being oppressed and gave soldiers information about what they were actually protecting. That's not interference, that's basic moral responsibility. The Empire brings order to chaos, Vader replied. Individual suffering is regrettable but necessary to maintain galactic stability. You speak from ignorance of the galaxy's complexity. I speak from experience building a nation where people don't have to choose between freedom and security, Rimuru countered. I've seen what happens when governments claim that cruelty is necessary for order. They're lying. Usually to themselves as much as to their victims. Vader's mechanical breathing intensified slightly. You presume to lecture me about governance? About sacrifice? I have seen the consequences of weakness, of sentiment, of allowing attachments to cloud judgment. The Emperor's vision brought an end to the Clone Wars, eliminated the corruption of the Republic, and established order across thousands of systems. By building a weapon that can destroy planets, Rimuru said quietly. I've seen the Death Star plans. That's not order, that's genocide as policy. And no amount of philosophical justification makes that anything other than evil. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Vader's hand moved toward his lightsaber, and Rimuru's analytical abilities immediately processed the weapon, plasma blade contained by magnetic field, powered by kyber crystal, capable of cutting through nearly any material. You have accessed classified Imperial files, Vader stated, his tone now carrying clear threat. That alone is grounds for immediate execution. But I am curious, you claim to represent a nation. Where is this nation? What authority do you claim in this galaxy? My nation exists in another universe entirely. I'm not here to conquer or claim territory. I'm here by accident, and I'll leave as soon as I figure out how. But while I'm here, I'm not going to stand by and watch people suffer when I have the power to help them. Rimuru's expression hardened. You can try to execute me if you want. But I should warn you, I've fought demon lords, faced down true dragons, and survived battles that would make your clone wars look like tactical exercises. I'm not afraid of you, Darth Vader. I respect your power, but I don't fear it. For a long moment, Vader simply stood there, processing this response. In his decades as the Emperor's enforcer, he had faced countless beings who claimed to be powerful, who boasted about their capabilities, who stood defiant until his lightsaber found them. But something about this being felt different. There was no bravado, no false confidence. Just calm certainty. Vader's hand closed around his lightsaber hilt. Then let us test your power, he said, igniting the crimson blade with its distinctive snap hiss. I will determine whether you are merely another delusional fool, or if you represent a genuine threat to the Empire's stability. Rimuru sighed deeply. I really hoped we could avoid this. But if you need a demonstration, he raised one hand, and space-time rippled around him. Just remember, you started this. The air between them shimmered with potential energy, two fundamentally incompatible forms of power about to collide. And across Lothal, Rimuru's inner circle felt through their soul corridor connection that their leader was engaging in combat. Veldora grinned with anticipation. Benimaru's flames ignited. Diablo's smile turned predatory. And Shuna began weaving the most powerful barrier magic she'd ever constructed, because if Rimuru and Darth Vader fought seriously, the collateral damage would be catastrophic. The Empire was about to learn a hard lesson about picking fights with interdimensional visitors who'd faced down apocalyptic threats. The first strike came faster than conventional perception could track. Vader launched himself forward with force-enhanced speed, his crimson lightsaber arcing toward Rimuru's neck in a textbook Form V opening, aggressive, powerful, designed to overwhelm opponents before they could establish defensive positions. The blade passed through empty air. Rimuru had shifted position through spatial manipulation, relocating 3 meters to Vader's left without physically traversing the intervening space. To Vader's force senses, it felt wrong, not teleportation as he understood it, but something that bypassed causality itself. Fast, Rimuru acknowledged, his tone still conversational despite the combat situation. Your augmentation through the force is impressive. But you're still thinking in terms of physical movement and reaction time. Vader didn't respond verbally. Instead, he extended his hand and unleashed force telekinesis with devastating power, invisible pressure that should have crushed Rimuru's internal organs or at minimum hurled him across the landing platform with bone-breaking force. Rimuru stood perfectly still as the telekinetic assault simply failed to affect him. His multi-layer barrier had activated automatically, and the force, powerful as it was, couldn't penetrate defenses that existed on a conceptual level rather than purely physical one. Interesting, Vader said, his mechanical breathing quickening with genuine curiosity now. You resist force manipulation. Isalamari create force void bubbles. Void stone absorbs force energy. But you simply exist outside its influence entirely. Different universal laws, Rimuru explained, still not attacking. Your force is native to this galaxy. My abilities operate on magicule principles from my home universe. They're not compatible systems, which means we can't directly affect each other through our respective power sources. Vader processed this information with the tactical brilliance that had made him legendary. If force abilities couldn't directly affect this being, then conventional combat techniques would be required. His lightsaber was still effective. The plasma blade wasn't purely force-based but rather contained by magnetic fields powered by kyber crystals. And his cybernetic enhancements provided physical strength beyond human norms. He attacked again, this time with a calculated sequence of strikes, high/transitioning to low sweep, following with a thrust aimed at center mass, each movement flowing into the next with the precision of someone who had spent decades mastering lightsaber combat. Rimuru dodged each strike through minimal movement, his thought acceleration allowing him to process Vader's attack patterns millions of times faster than they actually occurred. From his perspective, Vader moved in slow motion, each strike telegraphed seconds before execution. "You're holding back," Vader observed, pausing his assault. "Why?" "Because I don't want to fight you," Rimuru said honestly. "I told you, I respect your power. But more than that, I know who you were. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One, hero of the Clone Wars. You fell to save someone you loved. That's not the action of a monster, that's the action of someone who made a desperate choice and has been living with the consequences ever since." The mention of his former name made Vader's grip on his lightsaber tighten. Anakin Skywalker was weak. He allowed attachment to cloud his judgment. "I destroyed him." "Did you? Or did you just bury him under rage and pain because it was easier than facing what you'd become?" Rimuru's voice carried no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "I've met beings who embraced darkness completely, demon lords who reveled in suffering, primordial entities that existed only to destroy. You're not like them. You're angry. You're in pain. But you're not evil. Not completely." "You know nothing about me," Vader said, but his voice carried an edge that suggested Rimuru had struck deeper than any lightsaber could reach. "I know you're keeping me talking instead of calling in your fleet for orbital bombardment," Rimuru countered. "I know you haven't tried to kill the 5,000 civilians I just liberated, even though destroying them would be tactically sound if you wanted to prove Imperial authority. And I know you're curious about me, about how I exist outside the Force, about whether I represent opportunity or threat to your Emperor's plans." Vader's breathing filled the silence between them. Everything Rimuru said was accurate. The Sith Lord should have already called for fleet support, should have attempted to eliminate this being through overwhelming firepower if direct combat proved ineffective. But something held him back, partly tactical caution, partly genuine curiosity, and partly something he refused to acknowledge as the last dying embers of Anakin Skywalker's conscience. "The Emperor will not tolerate your presence in this galaxy," Vader said finally. "Your interference with Imperial operations marks you as an enemy. Your power makes you a threat. He will send everything at his disposal to eliminate you. Let him try." Rimuru's confidence wasn't bravado, it was simple statement of fact. "I've survived encounters with beings who could destroy planets through sheer force of will. I've negotiated with demon lords and built alliances with creatures that terrified entire civilizations. Your Emperor is powerful, I don't doubt that. But he's not invincible, and neither is his empire. You speak of destroying the Empire?" Vader's tone carried warning. "I speak of opposing tyranny wherever I find it. If the Empire chooses to make itself my enemy through continued oppression and genocide, then yes, I'll fight it. But I'd prefer another option." Rimuru met Vader's gaze directly. "I'd prefer to give people like you a choice. The soldiers I freed today, many of them didn't know what they were protecting. When shown the truth, they chose differently. You're more intelligent than them, more experienced, more powerful. You know exactly what the Empire does. But you also have the power to choose differently." "Choose what?" "Redemption." Vader's laugh was mechanical and bitter. "I am too far gone for that fantasy. The dark side has claimed me completely." "Has it? Or is that just what you tell yourself to avoid facing the harder choice?" Rimuru's voice softened. "I'm not saying you can undo what you've done. Some actions can't be taken back. But you can choose what you do next. You can choose to stop adding to the suffering. You can choose to use your power to protect instead of destroy." For a moment, just a brief, fragile moment, something flickered in Vader's Force presence. A crack in the dark side armor he'd wrapped around himself for decades. A whisper of the Jedi he'd once been, the hero who had fought to protect the innocent, the man who had loved deeply enough to fall trying to save someone. Then it was gone, crushed under the weight of years of rage and pain and the seductive certainty of the dark side. You understand nothing, Vader said, his voice cold once more. The galaxy requires order. The Emperor provides that order. Whatever methods are necessary are justified by the alternative, chaos, war, suffering on a scale that makes Imperial operations seem merciful by comparison. I understand that argument, Rimuru replied. It's the same one every tyrant in history has used. Submit to my authority or face worse consequences. But it's a false choice. There are other options, you're just not allowed to see them because acknowledging alternatives would mean admitting you chose this path rather than had it forced upon you. Vader's hand tightened on his lightsaber again, and for a moment Rimuru thought the Sith Lord might attack. But instead, Vader deactivated his blade with a sharp hiss. This conversation is pointless, Vader declared. You will leave this system immediately. The civilians you liberated will be allowed to relocate to non-imperial worlds, consider it a concession to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But you will not interfere with imperial operations again. If you do, I will return with sufficient force to ensure your destruction, regardless of your capabilities. Rimuru studied Vader carefully. The Sith Lord was making a tactical withdrawal disguised as an ultimatum. He'd assessed Rimuru's capabilities, determined that direct confrontation would be costly at minimum and potentially catastrophic, and decided to cut losses rather than escalate. It was pragmatic, intelligent, and surprisingly merciful by Imperial standards. I can accept those terms, Rimuru said slowly, with one addition. The children from the youth program facilities, they stay free. Any attempt to recapture them or retaliate against their families will void this agreement immediately. The children are irrelevant to Imperial strategic interests, Vader replied, which was as close to agreement as he was likely to offer. Then we have an understanding. I'll relocate the civilians to safe worlds and continue trying to find a way home. You'll report to your Emperor that I'm too dangerous to engage directly without unacceptable casualties. We both avoid a war that neither of us actually wants. Vader turned toward his shuttle, cape billowing dramatically. But he paused at the boarding ramp, looking back. You said you know who I was. But you don't know what I've done. The Jedi I've killed. The worlds I've devastated. The innocents who died because of my actions. Redemption is not possible for someone like me. Maybe not, Rimuru acknowledged. But choosing to do less harm going forward is always possible. You let those children go free just now. You're letting 5,000 people relocate safely. Those are choices that reduce suffering rather than add to it. Maybe that's not redemption. But it's something. Vader didn't respond, simply ascending the ramp as his shuttle's engines powered up. Within moments, the Lambda-class transport was lifting off, TIE fighters falling into escort formation. Rimuru watched them go, his analytical mind processing the encounter. He'd learned several crucial things. Vader was powerful but not invincible, the Emperor would now know about his capabilities and adjust Imperial strategy accordingly, and most importantly, there was still something human buried beneath Vader's armor, damaged, twisted, drowning in darkness, but not completely extinguished. Analysis complete, Raphael reported. Darth Vader's combat capabilities assessed. Lightsaber techniques, master level. Force abilities, exceptional. Tactical intelligence, superior. Psychological state, conflicted. Probability of defection from Empire, 3.7%. Probability of reduced aggression in future encounters, 47.2%. Not great odds, Rimuru muttered. But better than zero. He teleported back to where his inner circle had been anxiously monitoring the confrontation, materializing to find them in full combat readiness. Stand down, he said immediately. It's over. We reached an agreement. You reached an agreement with Darth Vader? Kanon's voice carried disbelief. That's not possible. He doesn't negotiate. He destroys. He negotiates when destroying costs more than it gains, Rimuru corrected. I demonstrated that fighting me would be expensive, He demonstrated that the Empire has effectively infinite resources to throw at problems. We both decided that maintaining current operations wasn't worth immediate war. Hera approached cautiously. So what now? You're just going to leave? Let the Empire continue operating on other worlds? For now, yes. We have 5,000 people who need to be relocated to safe worlds. We have 233 orphan children who need permanent homes. And we need to get intelligence about the Death Star to your Rebel Alliance leadership. Rimuru's expression was serious. I don't like leaving other people in Imperial control. But I can't free an entire galaxy by myself, and starting a war across thousands of systems would create suffering on a scale that makes current operations look minor. So you're choosing the practical option over the moral one, Rimuru observed, not judgmentally, just stating fact. I'm choosing to help the people I can help right now while building toward helping more people later, Rimuru clarified. The Rebel Alliance is already fighting the Empire. What they need isn't another powerful fighter, they need resources, intelligence, and proof that the Empire can be beaten. We can provide all three. Diablo stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. Master Rimuru, I took the liberty of copying the entire Imperial database during our infiltration of Lothal systems. Complete intelligence on fleet deployments, supply routes, classified weapons projects, and internal political structures. If we provide this to the Rebel Alliance, it would represent the single greatest intelligence coup in their history. Good work. Rimuru nodded approvingly. That information will save thousands of lives if used properly. Shuna had been analyzing the residual force energy from Vader's presence, her analytical magic parsing the strange supernatural power. Master Rimuru, I believe I understand the force better now. It's not just energy, it's almost alive, responsive to emotion and intent. The dark side that Darth Vader uses isn't inherently evil, but it draws power from negative emotions and creates feedback loops that reinforce those emotions. So Vader is trapped in a cycle where using his power requires rage, which creates more rage, which requires more power, Rimuru summarized. That's actually tragic. He's imprisoned by his own strength. Can he be freed? Veldora asked, genuinely curious rather than sympathetic. Or is he too far gone? I don't know, Rimuru admitted. But I think there's still something human in there. Something that made him let those children go free, that made him negotiate instead of calling down orbital bombardment. Whether that something can be reached, he shrugged. That's a problem for another day. Geld approached with a practical question. Where will we relocate the liberated civilians? Most are from Lothal originally, but returning them to Imperial-controlled territory would simply restart the cycle. The Rebel Alliance must have safe worlds or hidden bases, Rimuru reasoned, looking at Hera. Can you arrange refugee settlement? Hera nodded, already pulling up star charts on her datapad. We have contacts on several independent systems that maintain neutrality. They'll take refugees, especially if we can provide resources to help support them. But 5,000 people is a lot to place all at once. I can help with resources, Rimuru offered. I can create food, basic materials, even temporary housing through matter manipulation. What we need from you is local knowledge, which systems are genuinely safe versus which ones will just turn refugees over to the Empire for bounties. I can provide that, Hera confirmed. But Rimuru, you need to understand, the Empire will know where these people go. They might not immediately retaliate, but eventually, they'll use refugee locations to track rebel operations. Then we need to move quickly and establish patterns that confuse Imperial intelligence. Spread refugees across multiple systems, mix them with existing populations, provide false trails. Rimuru's tactical mind was already working through possibilities. So I need you to coordinate with Hera's intelligence network. Find every safe harbor within reasonable transport distance and establish secure communication channels. The Oni assassin bowed. Understood. Benimaru, work with Geld on logistics. I want every refugee provided with supplies for at least 6 months, food, medical supplies, basic technology. We're not just dumping people on random planets and hoping for the best. Of course, Rimuru-sama. Shuna, continue analyzing the Force. If we're going to be in this galaxy longer, understanding their fundamental power system will be crucial. Especially if we encounter more Force users. Already compiling research, Master Rimuru. And Veldora, Rimuru paused, considering. Try not to destroy anything while I'm coordinating refugee operations. I know that's asking a lot. Hey. I'm perfectly capable of not destroying things. Veldora protested. It's just that things sometimes accidentally get destroyed near me. Totally different. Aha. Rimuru couldn't quite suppress a smile. Cannon cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. If word spreads that you successfully defied Vader and liberated an entire planet's worth of Imperial prisoners, it's going to inspire hope across the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance has been fighting for years with limited victories. This is the kind of win that changes everything. It's also the kind of win that makes the Empire allocate massive resources to hunting us down, Sabine added pragmatically. You've made yourself into a symbol. Symbols are powerful, but they also paint targets. I'm already a target, Rimuru said simply. The moment we freed those first children, we became enemies of the Empire. The only question is whether we use that status to accomplish something meaningful or just run and hide. He looked at each member of his inner circle, then at the assembled rebels. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to relocate these civilians safely. We're going to provide the Rebel Alliance with intelligence that will help them strike meaningful blows against the Empire. And we're going to keep looking for a way home. But while we're here, while we're stuck in this galaxy, we're going to make sure our presence matters. We're going to show people that the Empire isn't invincible. That tyranny can be opposed. That there are still beings in the universe who use strength to protect rather than oppress. That's a dangerous path, Hera warned. It's the kind of path that leads to all-out war. Maybe, Rimuru acknowledged. But it's also the only path I know how to walk. I built the Tempest Federation on the principle that power exists to protect others. I'm not going to abandon that principle just because we're in a different universe. Diablo's smile was sharp and satisfied. Master Rimuru, I believe you've just declared war on a galactic empire. How delightfully ambitious. I didn't declare war. I declared that we're going to help people and oppose tyranny. If the Empire interprets that as war, that's their choice, not mine. Semantics, Diablo said cheerfully. Important semantics, Rimuru countered. We're not conquerors. We're not trying to rule this galaxy. We're just trying to do the right thing until we can go home. There's a difference. In orbit above Lothal, aboard the Devastator, Darth Vader stood before a holographic display showing Rimuru's parting conversation with his subordinates. Imperial intelligence had managed to intercept the transmission through conventional surveillance, and Vader had listened to every word. Prepare a full report for the Emperor, he ordered Admiral Constantine. Include all sensor data, combat analysis, and the complete text of my conversation with the entity. Yes, my lord. Should we maintain blockade positions around Lothal? No. Allow the refugees to depart unmolested. We will track their destinations through passive sensors and use the information to map Rebel Alliance support networks. Vader's tactical mind was already processing opportunities. The entity was correct about one thing: this situation can be used to our advantage if handled properly. My lord. The Rebel Alliance will see Rimuru Tempest as a potential ally, perhaps even a game-changing one. They will direct resources toward establishing contact, coordinating operations, building dependencies. And when the Emperor is ready to strike, we will use those connections to devastate not just the entity, but the entire rebel network they've inspired. It was cold, calculated, and ruthlessly pragmatic, exactly the kind of strategy that had made Vader so effective as the Emperor's enforcer. But somewhere beneath the tactical calculation, buried under years of darkness and pain, a small voice wondered whether beings who freed enslaved children and negotiated instead of slaughtering were really the Empire's enemies. Or whether the Empire itself had become something that deserved to be opposed. Vader crushed that thought immediately, drowning it in familiar rage. But it had existed, however briefly. And existence, once established, could never be completely erased. The Rebel Alliance leadership operated from a constantly moving fleet, paranoid necessity born from decades of Imperial pursuit. When Hera transmitted her report about the events on Lothal, complete with verified intelligence files and eyewitness accounts of beings who had single-handedly liberated an entire Imperial garrison, the response was immediate and skeptical in equal measure. Mon Mothma, the Alliance's political leader, studied the holographic displays in the war room of the MC-75 Star Cruiser Profundity. Around her, military commanders and intelligence officers reviewed the data with expressions ranging from hopeful to incredulous. 5,000 liberated prisoners, 0 casualties, and Darth Vader himself withdrew without engaging fully, Admiral Raddus said, his Mon Calamari features reflecting deep consideration. If this intelligence is accurate, we're discussing beings with capabilities that exceed anything we've encountered. The question is whether we can trust them, General Draven interjected, his intelligence background making him inherently suspicious. Interdimensional entities appearing conveniently when we need allies most. It feels too perfect. Could be an Imperial trap, sophisticated infiltration designed to compromise our networks. Phoenix Cell vouches for them, Hera's voice came through the comm, I've personally witnessed their capabilities. They're not Imperial agents. They're exactly what they claim, beings from another universe who are genuinely opposed to tyranny and oppression. Bail Organa, representing Alderaan's interests in the Alliance, leaned forward. Hera, you're asking us to base strategic decisions on entities we don't understand, whose motivations might change without warning, whose power could as easily be turned against us as the Empire. That's an enormous risk. With respect, Senator, we take enormous risks every day just by existing, Hera countered. The question isn't whether working with Rimuru and his people is risky, it's whether the potential benefits outweigh those risks. And the intelligence they've provided alone, she pulled up Imperial fleet deployment data that Diablo had stolen. This is real-time information about Star Destroyer positions, supply route schedules, and classified weapons projects. This is the kind of intelligence that could save thousands of lives. Mon Mothma studied the data with practiced political calculation. The Alliance was desperate, stretched thin across dozens of systems, constantly on the defensive, losing ground with each passing month. An ally with the power to challenge Darth Vader directly and the willingness to share game-changing intelligence represented an opportunity they couldn't afford to dismiss. But it also represented a potential catastrophe if these beings proved unreliable or hostile. I want to meet them, Mon Mothma decided. Arrange a neutral location where I can speak with this Rimuru Tempest directly. If we're going to establish any kind of alliance, I need to understand who we're dealing with. I'll relay the request, Hera confirmed. As the communication ended, Admiral Raddus voiced the concern everyone was thinking. If the Empire learns we're actively coordinating with these entities, they'll interpret it as proof we're working with extragalactic threats. It could be used to justify even more extreme measures. The Empire doesn't need justification for extreme measures, Bail Organa said quietly. They're already building the Death Star. What could be more extreme than a weapon capable of destroying planets? The room fell silent. The Death Star's existence had been rumored for months, but concrete intelligence had been scarce. If Rimuru's information about the superweapon was accurate, it changed everything. We need to verify this Death Star intelligence immediately, Mon Mothma ordered. And we need to determine whether these interdimensional beings represent our best chance at stopping it. On a transport ship carrying liberated civilians toward independent systems, Rimuru stood in the observation deck watching hyperspace tunnel past in streaks of impossible light. The journey would take several hours, giving him time to process everything that had happened since arriving in this galaxy. He'd freed 5,000 people. He'd confronted Darth Vader. He'd effectively declared himself an enemy of a galactic empire. And he still had no idea how to get home. Troubling thoughts, my lord. Diablo appeared from shadow beside him, his usual theatrical entrance somehow appropriate against the hyperspace backdrop. Just thinking about consequences, Rimuru replied. We helped people here, which is good. But we've also made ourselves into targets for an empire with effectively unlimited resources. And we're no closer to understanding how to return to the cardinal world. Shall I begin researching dimensional travel methods native to this galaxy? Their hyperspace technology suggests some understanding of alternate spatial dimensions, though obviously not true universal boundaries. Already asked Raphael to analyze it. The hyperspace here is more like folded space within the same universe rather than actual dimensional breach. Useful for faster-than-light travel but not for getting us home. Rimuru sighed. We might be stuck here for a while. Then we might as well make our time productive, Diablo said with evident satisfaction. I've been reviewing the Imperial intelligence we acquired. Their organizational structure is fascinating, brilliantly designed for consolidating power but inherently vulnerable to decapitation strategies. Remove Palpatine and Vader, and the entire command structure would collapse into competing factions. We're not assassinating their leadership, Rimuru said firmly. I wasn't suggesting we should, merely observing tactical vulnerabilities. Diablo's smile suggested he absolutely had been suggesting exactly that. Though I must say, Master Rimuru, your restraint with Darth Vader was admirable if strategically questionable. He represents one of the Empire's most effective weapons. Eliminating him would significantly weaken their military capabilities. He's also a person. Damaged, fallen, serving evil, but still a person who might be reachable. Rimuru turned to face Diablo directly. I know you think I'm being naive. But I've seen what happens when we treat everyone who opposes us as disposable enemies. We become the thing we're fighting against. And I've seen what happens when mercy is extended to beings incapable of change, Diablo countered. They exploit that mercy and cause additional suffering. Not all darkness can be redeemed, my lord. Maybe not. But I'd rather try and fail than give up without trying at all. Their philosophical debate was interrupted by Shuna's mental communication through the Soul Corridor. Master Rimuru, we're receiving a transmission from the Rebel Alliance leadership. Mon Mothma herself wishes to arrange a meeting with you. That was fast. What's the tone? Cautious but hopeful. They want to verify our intentions and discuss potential coordination. Tell them I'll meet. But somewhere neutral where both sides feel safe. And Shuna, make sure they understand I'm not looking to command their forces or take over their rebellion. I just want to help. Understood. Rimuru returned his attention to the hyperspace display, mind already working through the diplomatic complications of allying with a rebellion against a galactic empire while trying to maintain enough independence to pursue his own objectives. You're going to do it, aren't you? Diablo observed. Commit to helping them even though it risks extended conflict with the Empire. I don't see much choice. We're already enemies. Might as well make that enemy status count for something positive. Such heroic thinking. It's one of the qualities I find most fascinating about you, Master Rimuru, your absolute inability to simply walk away from suffering even when walking away would be easier. Diablo's tone carried genuine respect beneath the theatrical delivery. Very well. If we're to wage war against a galactic empire, we should do it properly. I'll begin developing strategic plans for maximum Imperial disruption with minimum civilian casualties. Just remember, we're helping the rebellion, not replacing it. These are their fights, their decisions. We're support, not conquerors. Of course, my lord. Though I suspect the distinction may blur somewhat in practice. Rimuru couldn't really argue with that. 3 days later, on the neutral world of Dantooine, a largely agricultural planet with minimal Imperial presence, Rimuru met with Mon Mothma in an abandoned rebel base that had been evacuated years earlier. The location was symbolic, proof that the rebellion had been fighting long before his arrival and would continue fighting long after he left. Mon Mothma arrived with minimal security, just Hera, Cannon, and 2 guards who looked distinctly nervous about meeting beings who had casually defeated Darth Vader. Rimuru had brought only Shuna and Benimaru, deliberately keeping the meeting small to avoid appearing threatening. Rimuru Tempest, Mon Mothma greeted him formally. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm Mon Mothma, Chief of State of the Alliance to restore the Republic." "Just Rimuru is fine," he replied, offering a slight bow. "And I appreciate you taking time to speak with me directly rather than just accepting intelligence reports." They sat in what had once been a strategy room, the holographic display table between them dark and inactive. Mon Mothma studied Rimuru carefully. He appeared young, almost innocent, but carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to enormous responsibility. "I'll be direct," Mon Mothma began. "The intelligence you've provided is valuable beyond measure. But before we discuss any kind of alliance or coordination, I need to understand who you are, what you want, and why you're helping us." "Fair questions." Rimuru leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but attentive. "Short version, I'm from another universe entirely, arrived here by accident through a dimensional rift, and I'll be trying to get home as soon as I figure out how. While I'm here, I can't in good conscience ignore tyranny and oppression, especially not when I have the power to do something about it. Your rebellion is fighting the same kind of evil I've fought before. So I want to help. And in exchange for this help? Nothing. I'm not looking for payment, territory, or political power. I just want to support your cause until I can return to my own universe." Mon Mothma's expression remained neutral, but Rimuru could sense her skepticism. "Forgive me, but that seems almost too altruistic. In my experience, beings with power want to use that power for personal gain." "I already have personal gain," Rimuru said simply. "I rule a nation in my home universe, the Tempest Federation. We've built a society where monsters and humans live peacefully together, where strength is used to protect rather than dominate. I don't need or want to rule here. I've got enough responsibilities waiting for me at home." Benimaru spoke up, his voice carrying military formality. "If I may add, Commander Mothma, Rimuru-sama has turned down offers of kingship, divine worship, and absolute authority multiple times in our world. He genuinely doesn't want to rule. He just wants people to be safe and free to make their own choices." "A leader who doesn't want to lead," Mon Mothma mused. "That's either remarkably humble or dangerously naive." "Little bit of both, probably," Rimuru admitted with a slight smile. "But I've found that the best leaders are usually the ones who see leadership as responsibility rather than privilege." Shuna added her perspective. "Master Rimuru has built his entire philosophy on protecting those who cannot protect themselves. When we arrived here and discovered imperial oppression, his reaction was immediate, not because he wanted glory or power, but because allowing suffering when you have the ability to stop it is a moral failure." Mon Mothma was silent for a long moment, processing. She'd spent decades in politics, learning to read people, to detect hidden agendas and manipulative rhetoric. But she found none of that in Rimuru. He seemed genuinely, almost dangerously sincere. "The Empire will see any alliance between us as proof that you're simply another arm of the rebellion," she warned. "They'll use it to justify increased aggression, possibly even accelerate the Death Star project." "The Death Star project needs to be stopped regardless," Rimuru countered. "That's not a weapon, that's genocide machinery. And if the Empire is willing to build something like that, they've already crossed every moral line that matters." "Agreed. But stopping it requires more than good intentions. We need intelligence on its location, defenses, and vulnerabilities. We need strike teams capable of penetrating Imperial security. And we need to do it before the weapon becomes operational." "I can help with all of that," Rimuru offered. "My people specialize in infiltration, intelligence gathering, and precision strikes. Diablo alone could probably infiltrate the Death Star construction site and return with complete technical specifications. And if the Empire captures one of your people, If they dissect them, learn how your abilities work, develop countermeasures. They can't. We're not force-based, remember. Imperial technology won't work on us the same way it works on native beings. And my subordinates are catastrophically powerful, capturing them would require resources the Empire doesn't want to commit. Mon Mothma leaned forward, her political instincts warring with desperate hope. If we work together, if we coordinate operations, you understand that you're committing to a war that could last years? Decades, even. The Empire doesn't fall easily. I understand. But I also understand that some fights are worth fighting even when victory isn't guaranteed. Rimuru's expression grew more serious. Listen, I don't have all the answers. I don't know how long I'll be in this galaxy. I don't know if we can actually defeat the Empire or just slow them down. But I know that doing nothing while people suffer isn't an option I can live with. Kanan, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. He means it, Mon Mothma. I've seen him in action. He freed 5,000 people and confronted Vader himself, and through it all, he prioritized protecting the innocent over winning. That's not someone using the rebellion for personal gain. That's someone who actually believes in what we're fighting for. Mon Mothma made her decision with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime making impossible choices. Then let's discuss how we can work together. Not as commander and subordinate, but as allies with complementary capabilities. You provide power, intelligence, and strategic disruption. We provide local knowledge, established networks, and political legitimacy. That works for me, Rimuru agreed. But, Mon Mothma continued, her tone carrying weight, you need to understand something. The rebellion isn't just about defeating the Empire. It's about what comes after. We're fighting to restore democracy, to establish a government that serves people rather than ruling them. If you're going to be our ally, I need to know you'll support that vision even after the Empire falls. I will, Rimuru promised. I've seen what happens when power vacuums aren't filled properly, it usually results in someone worse taking control. When the Empire falls, I'll help however I can to establish something better. But the government you build needs to be yours, not mine. This is your galaxy. You get to decide its future. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing tactical coordination, communication protocols, and operational boundaries. By the end, they had the framework of an alliance, informal, flexible, but built on mutual respect and shared objectives. As Mon Mothma prepared to depart, she offered one final observation. You're going to become famous across the galaxy, Rimuru. The being who freed Lothal and faced down Vader. People will look to you as a symbol of hope. That's powerful, but it's also dangerous. Symbols can be destroyed, and the Empire excels at destroying hope. Then I'll just have to avoid being destroyed, Rimuru replied with a slight smile. I've gotten pretty good at surviving impossible situations. After the rebels departed, Benimaru turned to Rimuru with a thoughtful expression. You've committed us to a war against a galactic empire with billions of troops and planet-destroying weapons. I feel obligated to point out that this is possibly the most ambitious military operation we've ever attempted. Yeah, Rimuru admitted. But it's also the right thing to do. And isn't that what matters? With respect, Rimuru-sama, doing the right thing doesn't make you bulletproof. Or plasma bolt-proof. Or Death Star-proof. True. But we've got each other, we've got our abilities, and we've got a cause worth fighting for. That's worked for us before. Shuna smiled gently. Master Rimuru, I believe what Benimaru is trying to say, somewhat tactlessly, is that we're with you regardless. If you've decided to help free this galaxy from tyranny, then we'll help you do it. Even if it's insane. Especially because it's insane, Benimaru corrected with a slight grin. Those tend to be our best operations. Rimuru felt warmth at their loyalty, their absolute willingness to follow him into impossible situations. He'd built the Tempest Federation on bonds like these, connections stronger than power, deeper than strategy, more fundamental than any political alliance. "All right then," he said, his voice carrying renewed determination. "Let's figure out how to steal Death Star plans, undermine Imperial authority, and somehow find a way home. All while avoiding getting killed by Sith Lords." Tuesday, basically, Rimuru deadpanned. And despite the galaxy-spanning conflict they just committed to, despite the overwhelming odds and catastrophic dangers ahead, Rimuru laughed. Because some things, friendship, loyalty, shared purpose, remained constant across universes. And those were the things worth fighting for. Emperor Palpatine stood in the throne room of the Imperial Palace, his gnarled hands resting on the arms of his obsidian chair as he reviewed the latest intelligence reports. Before him, projected in holographic form, was every scrap of data the Empire had collected on Rimuru Tempest and his inner circle over the past 2 weeks. It was woefully inadequate. "Fascinating," he murmured, his yellow eyes gleaming in the chamber's perpetual darkness. "They coordinate with the Rebel Alliance, yet maintain independence. They possess power that rivals Force abilities, yet exist entirely outside the Force's influence. They claim benevolent intentions, yet systematically dismantle Imperial operations wherever they appear." Director Krennic of Imperial Military Research stood at attention, clearly uncomfortable being summoned to the Emperor's personal chambers. "Your Majesty, I've reviewed the technical analysis of their capabilities. Whatever energy source they utilize, it operates on principles completely foreign to our understanding of physics. Our scientists cannot replicate it, cannot predict it, and cannot effectively counter it." "Then we must adapt our strategy," Palpatine said, his voice deceptively gentle. "If we cannot destroy them through conventional means, we must make destruction unnecessary. Tell me, Director, what does every powerful being desire?" Krennic hesitated, uncertain if this was a test. "Power, Your Majesty. Security. Purpose." "Precisely. And what have we observed about Rimuru Tempest's behavior patterns? He prioritizes protecting innocence. He avoids unnecessary casualties. He seeks diplomatic solutions before military ones. Which means he is predictable." Palpatine's smile was thin and predatory. "He can be manipulated through his own moral framework. If we present situations where his intervention causes more harm than good, where his protection of one group requires sacrificing another, we create paralysis. And paralyzed enemies are harmless enemies. An elegant strategy, Your Majesty. But implementation will be handled by Lord Vader personally. He has already demonstrated the ability to engage Rimuru without triggering immediate hostilities. We will use that connection." Palpatine gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show the Death Star's construction progress. "In the meantime, accelerate the battle station's completion. I want it operational within 6 months rather than a year." Krennic's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, accelerating the timeline will require additional resources, increased labor forces, and you will have whatever you require. The Death Star represents more than military superiority, Director. It represents absolute authority. Once operational, it renders beings like Rimuru Tempest irrelevant. What good is personal power when I can destroy entire star systems with the press of a button? Of course, Your Majesty. I'll begin reallocation immediately." As Krennic departed, Palpatine allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction. He had not survived decades of political maneuvering, orchestrated the fall of the Jedi Order, and constructed a galactic empire by underestimating threats. Rimuru Tempest was dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous being he'd encountered since the ancient Sith Lords of legend. But danger could be managed. It could be directed, controlled, ultimately eliminated. And if elimination proved impossible, well, the Emperor had other options. Options that would make even interdimensional beings wish they had never entered his galaxy. On a modified CR-90 Corvette traveling through hyperspace toward the Outer Rim, Rimuru was discovering the joys and frustrations of coordinating with a decentralized rebellion. He sat in the ship's conference room, considerably less impressive than the Tempest Federation's administrative chambers but functional, surrounded by holographic displays showing rebel cell locations, Imperial fleet movements, and potential target priorities. "This is impossible," he muttered, studying the tactical situation. "You've got cells operating independently across hundreds of systems, minimal central coordination, and intelligence that sometimes weeks out of date by the time it reaches leadership. How do you accomplish anything?" Hera, serving as his liaison to the Alliance, smiled ruefully. "Very carefully and with lots of improvisation. Welcome to Rebellion Logistics. We're not a proper military, we're a coalition of desperate people doing whatever we can with whatever resources we have. And yet you've survived for years against an empire with near-infinite resources." Rimuru shook his head in admiration. "That takes serious skill and determination. Also lots of luck," Cannon added. He'd been teaching Rimuru about Force philosophy during the journey, an exchange of knowledge that benefited both. "The Empire's overconfident. They assume their technological and numerical superiority guarantees victory. That blindness creates opportunities, which we're going to exploit systematically," Diablo said, materializing from shadow with his usual theatrical flair. He'd been conducting independent reconnaissance across multiple systems, gathering intelligence that made even Alliance spies jealous. "I've identified 17 high-value Imperial targets that meet our criteria: significant military or economic value, minimal civilian risk, and potential for major strategic disruption." He projected a new holographic display showing Imperial installations across the outer and mid-rim territories. Each was marked with detailed analysis: garrison strength, defensive capabilities, local population centers, and projected collateral damage from various attack vectors. "This one," Diablo highlighted a facility on Scarif, "is particularly interesting. Imperial security complex with what appears to be a massive data vault. According to intercepted communications, it houses classified information on every major Imperial project, including complete Death Star technical specifications." Rimuru leaned forward, studying the target. "Security. Formidable. Energy shields, garrison of 2 divisions plus naval support, sophisticated sensor networks, and likely Inquisitor presence given the facility's importance." Diablo's smile widened. "In other words, entertaining but manageable." "For you, maybe," Hera said. "For the rest of us, it's a suicide mission. The Alliance has been trying to get intelligence from Scarif for months without success." "Then we'll get it for you," Rimuru decided. "But not immediately. First, I want to hit some softer targets, establish patterns, test Imperial response times, and frankly, free more people who need help. Scarif can wait until we have better intelligence and coordination." So I emerged from his own shadow, having returned from a reconnaissance mission. "Master Rimuru, I've completed analysis of Imperial communication networks. I can insert false intelligence at multiple points in their chain of command, make them think we're in locations we're not, redirect forces away from our actual targets, generally create confusion. Do it. But carefully, we want them off balance, not so paranoid they start shooting civilian ships on suspicion." Rimuru pulled up another display showing liberated civilian populations. "How are the refugees from Lothal settling in?" "Better than expected," Hera reported. "The children especially, turns out giving them actual freedom and care makes them surprisingly resilient. Several of the older ones are already asking to join the rebellion once they're old enough. Tell them to focus on education first. The galaxy will need people who can rebuild after the war, not just fight during it." Rimuru's expression softened thinking about those children. "Any word on reuniting orphans with surviving relatives?" "We've managed 47 reunifications so far. Still working on the others. Some relatives are in Imperial-controlled territory, some are displaced refugees themselves, some," Hera trailed off. "Some might be dead," Rimuru finished quietly. "I know. But we keep trying until we're certain. Every child deserves to know if they have family left." Rimuru entered the conference room, his military bearing somehow making even casual ship corridors feel like parade grounds. Rimuru-sama, we've received an interesting communication. Forwarded through several rebel intermediaries, but the source claims to be Commander Titus from Lothal. The Imperial officer who surrendered? Rimuru's interest sharpened. What does he want? To defect, apparently. He's offering detailed intelligence on regional Imperial operations in exchange for asylum and the opportunity to help oppose the Empire. Hera looked skeptical. Could be a trap. The Empire's good at turning officers and sending them to infiltrate rebel cells. Could be genuine, Canon countered. Rimuru showed him evidence of Imperial atrocities he'd been complicit in. That kind of revelation can break loyal soldiers. Diablo, Rimuru said, can you verify his sincerity? Not torture, just observation. See if he's genuinely defecting or playing us. It would be my pleasure, my lord. Few things are more amusing than watching Imperial officers grapple with moral awakening. Diablo vanished into shadow, already en route to wherever Titus was hiding. If he's legitimate, we should accept, Rimuru decided. Redemption has to be possible, even for people who've done terrible things. Otherwise we're just creating more enemies than necessary. That's very Jedi thinking, Canon observed with approval. Is it? I thought Jedi didn't believe in second chances for dark side users. Old Jedi Order didn't. But maybe the new one can be better about that. Canon's expression carried old pain and new hope mixed together. The Order fell partly because we were too rigid, too certain of our righteousness. Maybe building something better means being more forgiving. Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout the ship. Rimuru's universal perception immediately identified the problem. 3 Imperial Star Destroyers had just dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, far too precisely positioned to be coincidence. They found us, Hera said, already moving toward the cockpit. That's not random patrol, someone gave them our route. Impossible, Canon protested. We encrypted everything, used secure channels. The Empire has unlimited resources and force users who can sense through deception, Rimuru interrupted, his mind already processing tactical options. They don't need to crack our codes if they can predict our behavior. Shuna, can you disrupt their tractor beams? Already on it, Master Rimuru. The Oni Princess's analytical magic wove through space, identifying the mechanical and energy systems that powered Imperial tractor beam projectors. Disruption in 3, 2, 1. The Corvette shuddered as it attempted to pull away, engines straining against gravitational forces that suddenly stopped. Shuna had temporarily disabled every tractor beam projector on all 3 Star Destroyers simultaneously, creating a window of escape. Veldora, I need a distraction, Rimuru ordered. Something that makes them reconsider pursuit but doesn't destroy their ships. Kohaha. Finally. The Storm Dragon's aura exploded outward, and suddenly the space around their corvette filled with storm phenomena that shouldn't exist in vacuum, lightning arcing between ships, gravitational distortions creating visible spatial warping, and an overwhelming presence that made even force-insensitive Imperial officers feel primal fear. What in the name of, the lead Star Destroyer's captain could be heard over intercepted communications. All ships, full reverse. We're not equipped to handle this. The Imperial fleet retreated in disorder, and their corvette jumped to hyperspace before the Imperials could regroup. In the aftermath, as they traveled toward their next destination, Hera looked at Rimuru with new appreciation. You know, when you said you'd help the rebellion, I thought you'd be joining our operations. But you're actually running your own parallel campaign that just happens to support our objectives. Is that a problem? No. It's actually brilliant. You draw Imperial attention and resources while we exploit the gaps. You operate with capabilities we can't match while we provide local knowledge and networks you need. It's complementary. That was the idea, Rimuru confirmed. You're the people who know this galaxy, know its politics and people and systems. We're the outsiders with unusual capabilities. Working together means both sides contribute their strengths. Geld entered the conference room, his massive frame somehow moving quietly. Master Rimuru, I've completed analysis of Imperial supply routes. I believe I've identified a critical vulnerability. There are 12 systems that serve as logistics hubs for their entire Outer Rim operation. Disabling even 3 would create cascade failures across dozens of sectors. Non-military targets? Rimuru asked immediately. The facilities themselves are military, but they're located in civilian population centers. We'd need surgical precision to avoid collateral damage. Then we'll be surgically precise. Start planning operations for those 3 most vulnerable hubs. I want 0 civilian casualties and maximum disruption to Imperial logistics. As his inner circle dispersed to their various tasks, Rimuru found himself alone with Kanan in the conference room. "Can I ask you something?" the Jedi said quietly. "Of course. How long can you maintain this? Fighting an empire across multiple fronts, coordinating with the rebellion, trying to find a way home, and keeping your moral principles intact throughout. Most beings would have compromised or burned out by now." Rimuru was silent for a moment, considering the question honestly. "I don't know," he admitted. "Back home, I have an entire nation supporting me, sharing the burden. Here, it's just my inner circle against impossible odds. But," he looked at Kanan directly. "But I've lived by a simple principle since I came to the cardinal world: protect those who can't protect themselves, and use strength to build rather than destroy. Abandoning that principle just because circumstances are difficult would mean becoming something I don't want to be. Even if maintaining it costs you everything. Even then. Because principles that only apply when convenient aren't really principles, they're just preferences." Kanan smiled, something bright and genuine. "You would have made a good Jedi. Better than most of us, probably. I'll take that as a compliment. Though from what you've told me, the old Jedi Order had some significant problems." "True. But the ideals, using power to serve others, seeking knowledge over ignorance, maintaining hope in dark times, those were worth keeping." Kanan's expression grew distant. "Maybe that's what survives. Not the order, but the principles. And maybe beings like you carry those forward better than any institution ever could." Their conversation was interrupted by Diablo's return, the primordial demon appearing with his characteristic dramatic flair. "Master Rimuru, I've assessed Commander Titus. His defection is genuine, traumatized by forced recognition of Imperial atrocities, motivated by genuine desire for redemption. He's offering intelligence on fleet deployments, officer corruption networks, and classified research facilities." Diablo paused. "He's also offering to testify about Imperial crimes should the Alliance ever establish public tribunals. The guilt is eating him alive. Then we accept his defection and put him to work," Rimuru decided. "Everyone deserves a chance to be better than they were. Give him to Alliance intelligence, let them verify his information and determine how best to use his knowledge." "As you command, my lord." As the meeting concluded and crew dispersed, Rimuru remained in the conference room, studying star charts and tactical displays. Somewhere in this galaxy, Emperor Palpatine was planning his response. Somewhere, the Death Star construction continued. Somewhere, innocent people suffered under Imperial rule. And somewhere, hopefully, there was a way home. But until he found it, he had work to do. The Empire had built itself on fear, on overwhelming force, on the belief that sufficient violence could crush any opposition. They were about to learn that some things, hope, determination, moral courage, couldn't be crushed no matter how much power was applied. They were about to learn that tyranny, no matter how entrenched, eventually faced beings who refused to accept it as inevitable. And most importantly, they were about to learn that a slime from another universe, backed by loyal friends and driven by simple principles, could be more dangerous than any Sith Lord. Because power wielded with compassion, strength tempered by wisdom, and victory pursued without losing one's humanity. That was the most dangerous force in any universe. The Tempest Federation had arrived in the Star Wars galaxy through accident and chaos, but their impact would echo across the stars for generations. What began as a simple dimensional rift on Lothal became the spark that reminded the galaxy that the Empire, for all its overwhelming might, was not invincible. Rimuru Tempest and his inner circle would spend the next several months conducting operations across dozens of systems, freeing prisoners, disrupting Imperial logistics, and providing the Rebel Alliance with intelligence and support that transformed them from desperate guerrillas into a genuine threat. They would infiltrate Scarif and steal the Death Star plans that would ultimately lead to the battle station's destruction. They would face Inquisitors and Star Destroyers, political intrigue and moral dilemmas, victories and setbacks. But through it all, they maintained the principles that defined them: protect those who cannot protect themselves, use strength to build rather than destroy, and never compromise core values even when circumstances demand it. Eventually, they would find a way home, a combination of Shuna's analytical genius, Diablo's manipulation of probability, and Raphael's god-tier processing capabilities, creating a new dimensional rift that would return them to the cardinal world. But they would leave behind a galaxy changed by their presence. The rebellion would remember the beings who proved the Empire could be challenged. The liberated worlds would remember those who freed them without demanding anything in return. And even the Empire, even Darth Vader himself, would remember that power without purpose, strength without compassion, and order maintained through fear ultimately carried the seeds of its own destruction. Some called them heroes. Others called them dangerous anomalies. A few called them legends. Rimuru Tempest called them friends who had faced yet another impossible situation and emerged unchanged in the ways that mattered, loyal, principled, and absolutely committed to protecting those who needed protection. The Tempest Federation had built a nation on the principle that strength existed to serve others. And for a brief, shining moment in a galaxy far, far away, they proved that principle could transcend universes.